Chapter 1191. Unexpectedly, there were no sounds of children playing inside. Instead, it was very quiet. The palace maid walked out quietly. "He's asleep." Chu Yang was stunned. "So regular?" It was just noon, and the sun was still right above his head. Only those who lived a very regular life and were very disciplined and had developed the habit of taking afternoon naps could possibly take a nap at this time. "Little Yang Yang has always been very regular when he sleeps." Tai Butian smiled proudly. "Brother Chu, do you know? This child has almost never wet the bed since he was young. He's very worry-free. He eats when he should and sleeps when he should. He's very quiet, very smart, and a very good child." There was undisguised pride on Tai Butian's face. Chu Yang scratched his head. "I'll go in and take a look." "What are you going to look at when he's asleep?" Tai Butian was a little displeased. "There's still a long way to go. What if you wake him up?" Chu Yang chuckled. "I'll just take a look gently." Under Tai Butian's extreme reluctance, Chu Yang walked in stealthily, as if he was a thief. On the big bed, a small figure was sleeping soundly. His body was covered with a thick blanket, and his hands were placed under the blanket. His small figure appeared very quiet and steady, actually giving off a sense of tranquility. A milky fragrance unique to children wafted over. Chu Yang went closer and saw that the child's complexion was normal, and his skin was tender. His small mouth was rosy and he had a high nose. His eyes were slightly closed, making his eyelashes look even longer, as if there were two small fans covering his eyes. His breathing was steady, and he was clearly in deep sleep. Chu Yang felt a surge of excitement in his heart. He felt a warm current surging up and he almost teared up. He stood in front of the bed with his back hunched, motionless, and looking at him greedily. That's right. This was her child. Not to mention the face that was almost 100% similar to her, and not to mention the charm that was almost 100% identical to her. Just the sudden feeling of being connected to her flesh and blood was enough to make her feel intoxicated. Just looking at him like this made Chu Yang realize that he didn't want to leave anymore. He felt like hugging the little fellow in front of him, kissing him fiercely and laughing out loud. Moreover, his heart was filled with the feeling of infinite satisfaction, that kind of feeling of wanting nothing else. At this moment, Chu Yang simply wanted to look up to the sky and let out a long howl of laughter. Without an official position, one's body would be light, and everything would be sufficient. This was a very common farmer's concept. But now, Chu Yang felt that this sentence was really fucking reasonable. "How beautiful, so beautiful, good girl," Minister Chu muttered to himself. Tai Butian was rather anxious. This fellow had the tendency of being unable to look away once he saw something. How could this be? However, she quietly pulled Chu Yang's sleeve a few times, but Chu Yang didn't even notice. Finally, a mission. "What are you doing?" Chu Yang turned his head in displeasure. He frowned and asked in a low voice. "Can I just take a look?" Tai Butian was rather speechless. She replied softly. "You've already been watching for more than an hour." Chu Yang awkwardly stood up. Then, he reluctantly looked at her again and said, "More than half an hour has passed so quickly? Let's talk outside. Don't wake him up." Tai Butian tugged at his sleeve and walked out. Chu Yang kept looking back as she dragged him out. When they were outside, they walked into the study and closed the door. Tai Butian heaved a sigh of relief. Chu Yang looked at Tai Butian. Suddenly, a fire of jealousy burned fiercely in his heart. "Damn it, my son, look at him being dragged out too. Yet this woman is with him every day. She's monopolizing him." Chu Yang suddenly felt very suffocated. Previously, he had been thinking about his responsibilities, burdens, the world, the people, his difficulties, and so on. But now, he didn't want to restrain himself anymore. Especially after seeing his son, this feeling was even more uncontrollable. "He's really very cute." Minister Chu's throat was dry. He snatched Tai Butian's teacup from the study and gulped down 2 big mouthfuls. Wiping his mouth, he asked somewhat hurriedly, "What's his name?" Tai Yang. Tai Batian was equally perturbed. It means that he's as tough as iron. Standing tall and proud, he looks down on the world. Tai Yang. Tai Yang. The more Chu Yang muttered, the more he felt that something was wrong. He felt somewhat uncomfortable. If this little one were to return to the clan and change his surname to Chu, he would be called Chu Yang? Wouldn't he have the same name as me then? Chu Yang was somewhat speechless. It was already a joke that his own father had become his sworn brother. Who would have thought that when it was his turn, he would have to have the same name as his son? Tai Yang, that's a pretty good name. Minister Chu pinched his nose and said against his will. Does he have a nickname? His nickname will be Little Yang Yang. Tai Batian smiled. As for his nickname, it can only be given when he's 10 years old and crowns his crown. Not bad, Little Yang Yang. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. My nickname is Yang Yang. Teacher used to call me Little Yang Yang. Now, not only has my son taken over my name, he's even plagiarized my nickname. Do you have the same name? Tai Batian rolled her eyes. No, his surname is Tai and yours is Chu. How can you have the same name? Chu Yang put down his teacup with a heavy heart and heaved a long sigh. Tai Butian's heart shrank. Why is Brother Chu sighing? Chu Yang's expression was bleak. Brother Tai, didn't you ask me why I suddenly came to the lower 3 heavens? What I said then was actually not true. Actually, the main reason I came to the lower 3 heavens this time was to ask for your help. Tai Batian was startled. Help? Yes. Chu Yang said seriously. In this world only you, Brother Tai, can help me with this matter. Seeing how serious he was, Tai Butian's heart couldn't help but become heavy. She said, Brother Chu, as long as I can help, even if I have to use all the power of the country, I won't shirk my duty. Chu Yang sighed deeply and said, I still remember that day when we parted. Brother Tai once said, the martial world is dangerous, take care of yourself. I, Chu Yang, admit that I'm careful and quick-witted enough. But in the upper 3 heavens, I still fell into their trap. Tai Butian's expression tightened. Fell into their trap? What's wrong? You're injured? But I'm poisoned. Chu Yang sighed. Brother Tai, I seem like a good person to you now, right? But actually, I used elixirs to suppress the toxicity. But this is not a long-term solution. Once it flares up, my whole body will turn into pus and I'll die. As he spoke, Chu Yang took out a small gourd of spiritual spring water and said, And I only have this little bit of medicine to suppress the toxicity. It can only suppress it for a month's time. Chu Yang looked at Tai Batian sorrowfully and somewhat tragically. If Brother Tai doesn't save me, a month later you and I will be separated by life and death. Brother Tai, look, there are already changes on my arm. As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeves and revealed his arm. On his upper arm, there was a dark green patch that seemed to be rotting. Tai Butian's expression changed drastically. What kind of poison is in you? How can it be so overbearing? She was angry and anxious. You're poisoned and you're still drinking with me? Chu Yang put down his sleeves and smiled lightly. The poison can be ignored, but when good brothers meet, wine must be drunk. Tai Batian was furious. Cut the crap. Tell me, what kind of poison is in you? How do you need me to help you? What are you dawdling for? Tai Batian was really anxious now. Her eyes were about to spit fire. Brother Tai has also seen this kind of poison before. That's why after I knew about it, I immediately abandoned everything and rushed here with all my might. Chu Yang grabbed Tai Butian's hand. Brother Tai, you must save me. Don't worry. Tai Butian said confidently. As long as I can do it, I will definitely. New clothes are not as good as old friends. Chu Yang sighed emotionally. Brother Tai, you're still a true friend. Are you going to tell me or not? Tai Batian was so anxious that she stomped her feet. I'm poisoned. Chu Yang looked at the Empress with bright eyes and said softly, I'm poisoned with aphrodisiac. Aphrodisiac? Tai Batian was dumbfounded. To be more specific, it's the kind of aphrodisiac that I once encountered in the mountains of Beyond the Heavens sect. The corners of Chu Yang's mouth twisted into a smile. The aphrodisiac of the lust dragon! Ah! Tai Butian let out a cry of shock, dumbfounded. At this moment, her whole body was burning up intensely. Tai Butian was finally sure that Chu Yang had long known about this matter. He was here today to lay his cards on the table with her. The Emperor was so ashamed that she couldn't show her face. But Chu Yang obviously wouldn't let her off. Even now, he was still holding her hand and shaking it vigorously. Brother Tai, you can definitely cure this poison. Tai Butian's greatest secret hidden in the bottom of her heart was suddenly exposed, and it was clearly exposed by the person involved. She was angry, embarrassed. Her whole body was burning up. She held the dagger tightly and said angrily, "Let go of me! Let go of me!" At this point, if Chu Yang let go, then he really wouldn't be called Chu Yang anymore. He might as well be called Stupid Pig Chu. He held Tai Butian's hand tightly and refused to let go. He kept pleading, "Brother Tai, please save me. My poison is quite serious." Tai Butian lowered her head with all her might, burying her face into her chest. "You idiot! Let go of me! You!" One could vaguely see that even her neck had turned red. Her two little ears were also so red that they were almost transparent like agates. It was too hasty and unexpected. His Majesty's wisdom had already flown beyond the clouds. Now, his mind and heart were completely blank. Chapter 1192. Tai Butian resisted with all her might. Right now, her mind was in a mess, and she was so embarrassed that she couldn't think. She wanted to rebuke him angrily and argue for what was right. She had countless reasons in her mind, but she couldn't say anything at the moment. She was completely engulfed in panic. She could only use her hands to support herself against Chu Yang's chest, panting. You! Let go! Let go! Chu Yang said. "It's easy to let go of you, but what about my poison?" Minister Chu was acting shamelessly, but he was secretly pleased. Damn it, I really couldn't tell that this girl was so well endowed. She looked as flat as a man, but it was only after physical contact that I realized that you really couldn't judge a book by its cover. It was just that, how did such a majestic thing hide? Chu Yang took a look and realized that all he saw was still a flat surface. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. Looks like this thing can completely affect one's vision. What exactly is this good thing? Chu Yang was extremely puzzled. He wanted to ask the sword spirit, but then he remembered that the sword spirit had gone on strike ever since he entered the passage. After a round of exploration, he still couldn't find where the thing that could affect one's vision was. Chu Yang was extremely puzzled. "Let go of me!" Tai Butian struggled with all her might. "I'm poisoned!" Chu Yang hugged her shamelessly. "Hugging me like this can relieve some of the poison." However, he scoffed at his own words in his heart. Relieve some of the poison? Seems like this poison is getting more and more powerful. Poison your head! You bastard! Tai Butian was extremely embarrassed. She exerted all her strength and struggled out of his arms, panting like a cow. Outside the door, a sharp voice said cautiously, Your Majesty! Your Majesty, what happened? Do you need us? Chu Yang crossed his arms and looked at her with a half-smile. Tai Butian stomped her feet and sorted out her messy thoughts. She tried her best to keep her voice steady and shouted, None of you are allowed to come in. All of you, leave! After a pause, she said somewhat angrily, All of you, leave the palace! No one is allowed to come in! She thought about how she was being bullied by this bastard. If others saw or heard about this, then she, the Emperor, would really be too ashamed to face them. Entangling with a man in her image as a man. Tai Butian's heart shuddered at the thought of it. But as soon as she gave the order, she immediately regretted it. If everyone left, wouldn't it make things easier for this scoundrel? However, there was a sound of agreement from outside, followed by a crash, and the guards, maids, and eunuchs disappeared without a trace. Tai Badian panted heavily as she held onto the table. Her eyes darted around, trying to calm her emotions down completely. At the same time, he racked his brains to think of a countermeasure. What should he do? What should he do? But after thinking about it for a long time, he felt his heart become more and more confused. He didn't have a single clue at all. She was usually someone who would remain calm even if a mountain collapsed in front of her. She was quick-witted and calm in the entire heavenly layer. However, she was at her wits' end when facing this person whom she was deeply in love with. However, Chu Yang didn't seem as anxious as before. Instead, he calmly and steadily took 2 steps back. Then, he crossed his arms, and calmly sat down. You already knew, didn't you? Tai Badian questioned fiercely. Her face was still very red, but under the cover of that magical piece of jade, she didn't look too pathetic. Know what? Chu Yang asked with a puzzled look on his face. Don't play dumb! Tai Badian stomped her feet fiercely and roared in grief, indignation, and embarrassment. Now that there was no one around, the Emperor immediately became fierce again. Oh, you're talking about me being poisoned? Chu Zhang suddenly realized. I'm really poisoned. I don't know how to cure you. Tai Badian roared with a red face. She said angrily. I'm a man. How can I cure your poison? Even if you know how to cure me, I won't necessarily use you. Chu Zhang crossed his legs and said. I know you're a man. A man, that person. But I didn't say I'll let you cure me. Call little Tian Tian out and I'll let little Tian Tian cure you. Little Tian Tian is familiar with this and has experience. I'm not worried. Tai Badian was instantly ashamed and scolded angrily. Bastard! If you don't call little Tian Tian out, you will cure me. Chu Yang stretched out 2 fingers and said. You have 2 choices. First, you turn into a woman and cure me. Second, you let little Tian Tian cure me. The poison must be cured. There's no room for discussion. Tai Badian gritted her teeth and looked at this shameless person. Where was she going to find that little Tian Tian? Tai Badian and little Tian Tian were the same person in the first place. This guy obviously knew the whole truth but still pretended to be magnanimous, and said that he was giving her 2 choices. What choice could she make? Pooh! Tai Butian's delicate body trembled. Her lips trembled as she asked. Let's be serious. How did you know? If I wanted to know, I naturally knew. Chu Zhang retracted his playful attitude. His expression turned solemn as he looked at Tai Badian with bright eyes. Tai Badian was actually flustered by his gaze and lowered her head. I've always been curious. From the moment I saw you, you were a man. Chu Zhang was somewhat puzzled. Even now you're still a man. But you're clearly a woman. How did you do it? Tai Badian bit her lip and said hatefully. It's none of your business. In the past, it was none of my business. But now I can't. Chu Yang dragged his voice. Brother Tai Xian. Shut up. The word Brother Tai made Tai Badian feel extremely embarrassed again. Before her identity was exposed, it was only natural for her to be called Brother Tai. But now, no matter how she heard it, it didn't seem right. Tell me the reason, Chu Yang said seriously. Tai Badian was silent. Chu Yang sighed and said, That day, I waved my sword across the sky and fought at Sung Mountain. The outcome was already decided and I left. I thought that I had left without any worries. Who would have thought that I owed so much? You didn't want me to know because you were afraid of increasing my burden. But have you ever thought that if I'm kept in the dark for the rest of my life, then wouldn't I be worse than a dog? Chu Yang stood up and walked over slowly. His voice was gentle as he said softly. Back then, in the mountains of Beyond the Heaven sect, the little Tian Tian who risked her chastity to save me was you, right? Hua Badian stood there in a daze. Her eyes suddenly turned hazy, and she felt weak all over. Hearing this, she couldn't help but nod lightly. Little Tian Tian, is your nickname? Chu Yang asked softly. Tai Badian bit her lip again and nodded lightly. Let little Tian Tian show herself. Chu Yang placed his hands on both of her shoulders. His warm breath seemed to be about to melt Tai Batian. He said softly, "Let me see my savior." Tai Batian struggled hard. "You've already seen her." "No, I haven't," Zhang said lightly. "I'm tired of seeing you, the Emperor. Now I want to see little Tian Tian." Tai Batian only shook her head. Yang took a deep breath and said, "All right, if you insist on not letting me see little Tian Tian, then I'll strip you naked. Let's see if His Majesty the Emperor is still a man when he's naked." As he spoke, he exerted force and tore outwards with a tearing sound. Tai Butian's imperial robe was instantly torn apart by him. "Wait!" Tai Butian panicked at once. She knew that this guy in front of her was definitely someone who would do what he said. She clutched the front of her clothes tightly and said shyly, "I'll tell you. Hurry up and say it." Minister Chu was immensely proud of himself. He had a very arrogant attitude. Suddenly, a feeling of pleasure arose in his heart, as if he was robbing a common woman. Tai Batian bit her lip and said, "I have a piece of jade on me, a piece of jade?" Yang looked at her questioningly. "A piece of jade." As she spoke, she took off the illusory image jade from around her neck. Holding it in her hand, she lowered her head deeply. However, this great transformation had left Minister Chu dumbstruck. After taking off that piece of jade, the graceful and elegant emperor in front of him actually transformed into a delicate and slender beauty. Apart from the fact that the crown was still on her head, even if she was blind, she would definitely not say that the person in front of her was a man. A dense light scream flashed past. That originally flat chest suddenly trembled and rose, and that waist that originally looked very manly shrunk rapidly into a slim waist. Her figure was tall and curvaceous. A scent that belonged to a woman hit him in the face. Minister Chu was dumbfounded. Her face was like a full moon and her skin was delicate. Although her head was lowered, those cherry lips, perky nose, long eyelashes and that silhouette were clearly that of a peerless beauty. A peerless beauty dressed in the emperor's robes was standing in front of him in such a disheveled state, looking shy and timid. Yang was dumbfounded. He muttered to himself, "Sure enough, she's a girl, and such a beautiful girl, this young master's first cough cough, you. Have you seen enough?" Tai Batian said angrily. As she spoke, she reached out to grab that piece of jade and was about to put it back on. Yang was quick. With a whoosh, that piece of jade was already in his hands. The next moment, with a flip of his palm, it was already in the tribulation dimension. "You want to change back?" "Wishful thinking. I haven't seen enough." Tai Batian was furious at once. "Give it back to me." But Chu Yang's expression changed and he bowed respectfully to her. Tai Batian was shocked. "What are you doing?" She hurriedly dodged. Zhang said seriously, "This is my gratitude to you. Thank you, miss, for saving my life at such a critical moment without caring about your daughter's innocence. This kindness is hard to repay. This is the first reason." Tai Batian was a little dizzy. Was there a second and third reason? She heard Yang go on. "Secondly, thank you for giving birth to my child and allowing the Chu clan to have a descendant. Thirdly, it's too hard for you to raise a child alone. I don't know much about that, but I have to thank you." Tai Butian's face turned red. She stomped her feet and said, "Who wants your thanks?" Zhang said seriously, "I really don't know how to repay Mrs. Kindness. After thinking about it, I can't think of anything. I can only repay Mrs. Kindness by giving myself to you." Chapter 1193. This was the first time in her life that Tai Batian, who was a girl, was exposed in front of others. She was still not used to it, so when she heard this, she blushed and said angrily, "Nothing good comes out of a dog's mouth. We'll discuss whether something good comes out of a dog's mouth in the future." Yang straightened up and said, "I've already expressed my gratitude. Next, let's settle the score." Tai Batian was stunned. "Settle the score? What score?" Yang said fiercely. "Humph. The matter you did back then was closely related to me, but you hid it from me. My innocence was also ruined in your hands. This is the first point. You were pregnant, but as the person who made you pregnant, you didn't tell me either. This is the second point. You gave birth to a child, and the child is mine. You didn't tell me either. This is the third point. When the child grew up, you didn't even want him to acknowledge his ancestors. This is the fourth point. Batian was embarrassed and confused. She was furious. What kind of twisted logic is this? This fellow actually said that his innocence was ruined in my hands. He's shameless to this extent. He's really a weirdo in the world. Chujiang said. Combined punishment for multiple crimes. I'll now execute the family law. Family law? Batian was stunned. She was the ruler of the world, and this fellow was actually going to execute the family law on her. What family law? Then, she saw the guy in front of her fiercely step forward. Before she could react, he had already grabbed her by the waist. She felt dizzy for a moment, and was pressed face down on his thigh. Then, he waved his right hand, and a crisp, "pa" sound was heard. Batian let out a cry, her almond-shaped eyes wide open. Her delicate buttocks had been slapped hard by Chujiang. Chujiang said, You're so lawless and disobedient. If you're not punished, won't you turn the world upside down in the future? Smack. The Emperor's noble buttocks were slapped again. Batian let out another cry of shock. It didn't hurt that much, but it was the first time in her life that she was spanked in such a position. Not to mention that Batian was the ruler of a generation. Who would dare to spank her? But now, not only had she been beaten up, she had even been beaten up in such a shameful manner after she had regained her original appearance. Batian couldn't accept this at all. She bellowed furiously. Put me down! However, Chu Yang's hand was pressing down on her like a heavy mountain. She couldn't move at all. His right hand, however, slapped after slapping without mercy. Batian's face flushed red. Hearing the slapping sounds and feeling the pain, Batian was furious at first. He was furious. After struggling for a while, the strength of the struggle gradually weakened. Her face became redder and redder as she bit her red lips. She tried her best to stop herself from screaming. Chujiang was also angry. So, he used some strength in the first few slaps. But he didn't use any strength later on. On the contrary, he enjoyed it a little. But of course, he had to ask fiercely. Do you know you're wrong? Batian gritted her teeth and didn't say anything. Pa! Do you understand? He still didn't speak. Pa! Chujiang continued to slap her unhurriedly. Suddenly, a strange emotion surged up in his heart. He became more and more agitated. Are you confessing or not? Chu Yang's mouth was crooked. Don't hit me anymore. I know I'm wrong. After more than 10 slaps, Batian finally couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't because of the torture, but because Chu Yang didn't use any strength in the last few slaps at all. They were practically caressing her, strictly speaking, Batian. This was the first time in her life that she was so close to a man. Although it was once in the mountains of Beyond the Heavens sect, she was flustered and didn't have any memories at all. Even if she did, it was pain and worry. She couldn't bear to think about it. This time, she was really in a man's arms. For a moment, her whole body went limp. You know you're wrong? Chu Jiang was overjoyed. But he still gave her another slap. Then, where did you go wrong? Batian was so embarrassed that she was about to break down. She was also about to die of anger. This guy was still not done. Let me up first. I'll tell you. She was already panting. But she didn't expect another slap to answer her. No! Just say it like that. Batian really wanted to faint. She had no choice but to lower her voice and beg. Brother Chu, huh? Chu Yang snorted. Chu Yang. Batian hurriedly corrected herself. She begged. Chu Yang. You. Can you at least save me some dignity? Smack! What answered her was, of course, a slap. Chu Yang became more and more spirited. He didn't let her off. You've already given birth to a son, and you're still talking about dignity and dignity in front of me. You really deserve a slap. But as Chu Yang slapped her, a change in his mentality slowly occurred. The more he slapped her, the better he felt. Soft, firm, perky. Chu Yang, a virgin who had been thirsty for several years, suddenly felt his blood boiling. Strictly speaking, Chu Yang was the same as Tai Butian. They were both virgins in this life. The difference was that although Tai Butian's memories of her first time were somewhat unbearable, she could still remember some things. But Chu Yang didn't know anything and had lost his first time in a daze. Now that he knew that he had actually missed such an important thing, how could Chu Yang let it go? To a man, this was practically a great humiliation. And now, the culprit was right in front of him. Chu Yang's hand unknowingly slid into her lapel. Tai Butian's whole body trembled. Suddenly, with a strength that came from nowhere, she actually broke free from his grip and retreated. She used too much strength and almost fell on her butt. Chu Yang looked up and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The beauty in front of him was flushed. Her hair was messy and even the crown on her head was crooked. Strands of beautiful hair were scattered and her perky breasts were trembling with her rapid breathing. So beautiful, Chu Yang murmured. Tai Butian's beauty was different from Wu Qianqian's, and Mo Qingwu's and Zi Xieqing's. This was a kind of elegant, noble and majestic beauty. Moreover, she was graceful and peerless. Between her smile and frown, what was displayed was an awe-inspiring and inviolable nobility. As if looking at her was blasphemy. But this kind of beauty in Chu Yang's eyes. Out of nowhere, he felt the thrill of conquering her. This was because such a fairy-like beauty had already given birth to a son for him. What else was there to worry about? Chu Yang pounced on her like a hungry wolf. Wait! Tai Butian took 2 steps back and shouted. Her expression was resolute. Suddenly, she pulled out a knife and held it against her neck. You! If you use force, I will die in front of you! Chu Yang was instantly stunned. He felt a little dizzy. What kind of show was she putting on now? She had already given birth to a son. Why was she still, although he could snatch Tai Butian's knife away with just a stretch of his hand? It wouldn't hurt Tai Butian at all. But he still chose to take 2 steps back. Tai Butian held the knife with one hand, her gaze relaxed. She started to pant rapidly. After a long while, her breathing finally stabilized. Then, she stood up and tidied up her clothes. She walked slowly to the back of the desk and said, "Sit down!" Her face was still flushed, but her voice was calm and majestic, not allowing any resistance. Although her gaze was still a little dazed, it had already regained its original brilliance. "Sit down, let's talk," Tai Butian said calmly. Chu Yang sat down, a little confused. He asked cautiously, What's wrong with you? Let's talk about what?" A smile appeared on Tai Butian's face. She said, "Let's talk today. Let's not talk about national affairs, let's not talk about the lives of the people. Let's just talk about you and me." "Me and you?" Chu Yang frowned. "Yes, you and me." Tai Butian smiled calmly and said, "Chu Yang, I have been through great changes since I was young. All my family members have passed away. She has been disguised as a man all this time. You know the reason behind it. Here it is. I won't say anything more." Chu Yang smiled bitterly. Indeed, after today's events, there was an explanation for all the puzzles in Iron Cloud Nation and Tai Shicheng's actions. If he still didn't understand, he would really be a fool. "As you know, I like you. I like you with all my heart." Tai Butian looked at Chu Yang with her dignified and beautiful eyes. When it came to talking about her feelings, this emperor didn't have the bashfulness of an ordinary woman at all. She said bluntly, "Perhaps you don't know why I like you. Now I'll tell you. Do you know? When you came to Iron Cloud, it was the most difficult time for Iron Cloud. At that time, there was no hope for Iron Cloud at all. Even Imperial Uncle Tai Longqing said, Iron Cloud would sooner or later become Diwuqing Ro's achievement. What we had to do was to extend this time infinitely. We had to hold on for as long as we could. At that time, I was struggling every day. I was in despair every day. I couldn't sleep for several days. Even if I did sleep, I would immediately have a nightmare and wake up. But countless people were watching me. If I broke down, Iron Cloud would be completely finished. Even the last hope would be gone. I could only force myself to be calm and act like I was in control of the world. On the surface, I was calm every day. But the fear and helplessness in my heart was something no one could know. No one could understand. The entire Iron Cloud nation, the burden of hundreds of millions of people, the hope of generations, were all placed on the shoulders of a weak woman like me. 2 drops of tears slowly flowed down from Tai Butian's eyes. However, from the top to the bottom of Iron Cloud, from the officials to the commoners, to the merchants, and even to the beggars and prostitutes, Diwuqing has investigated countless times. I knew, but I really didn't have the energy to do anything. In the south, Diwuqing Ro's army was watching covetously. Golden Horse Riders Department was on standby. In the north, wolves from the grasslands were coming south at any time. Iron Cloud was in chaos. Father was critically ill. You don't know how much pressure I was under, Tai Butian said miserably. At that time, I wanted to kill myself countless times to end this torment. Do you know? Although I was the Empress, the only successor of Iron Cloud Nation, I was still a woman. I needed someone to rely on. But at that time, there was no one for me to rely on. Instead, I wanted to be everyone's support. Chapter 1194. Chu Yang sighed. Thinking of the pressure that Tai Butian had to endure, even he, who had endured countless hardships, could not help but feel sad. At that time, Tai Butian, as a weak woman, was able to withstand the pressure of the sky collapsing. It was a miracle. A one-of-a-kind miracle in the heavenly layer world. Even the hero Tai Longqing was in despair, let alone a weak woman like Tai Butian. Other than Tai Butian, no other woman in the heavenly layer world would have been able to withstand it. My name is a man's name. Before I was born, my father had already chosen a name for me. He longed for an emperor with great talent and strategy to mend the collapsing sky of Iron Cloud. But after I was born, I was still a woman. In his despair, my father placed all his hopes on me. But he did not know that a man and a woman are different. No matter how strong I am still a woman. But I grew up just like that. Ho Butian smiled sadly. I was raised as a man. Do you know, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I still firmly believed that I was a man. Chu Yang, don't you think this is funny? Chu Yang lowered his head and sighed deeply. As an outsider, just listening to the story was enough to make one feel extremely depressed. However, as the main character in the story, Tai Butian had endured it for more than 10 years. How did she get through it? Tai Butian paused for a while and said, Iron Cloud was declining day by day. I was already in despair. I could no longer see any hope. But at that time, you appeared outside Iron Cloud Citadel. The first time you appeared, you were dressed in black, like a whirlwind blowing across the earth. I still remember when your eyes met mine. It was a strange feeling. It was as if I should not have seen you, but I did. It was very strange. Chu Yang's heart shook. He clearly remembered the situation at that time. At that time, Chu Yang left Du Shiqing's group and came north by himself. Outside Iron Cloud Citadel, he met Tai Butian for the first time. Their gazes met from afar. At that time, Chu Yang's gaze was cold and sharp, proud and wild, like the wolf king of the northern plains, sharp as a sword and cold as ice. Those eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Under such a gaze, all living beings in the world were ants that could be slaughtered. The heavenly palace was like grass that could be trampled on. However, Tai Butian's gaze was gentle, warm, and tranquil. In fact, it seemed as if he was overlooking the common people from the clouds. His lofty aura of a king spread with the wind. I'm here, and I'm the king. Under the heavens, there is no land that belongs to the king. There is no land that belongs to the king. One was intentional, the other unintentional, but both of them gave it their all without prior consultation. This was a contest. However, there was no winner or loser in this contest. If Chu Yang's gaze was the waves, then Tai Butian's gaze was the reef. The waves surged, rolling up 1,000 piles of snow. The reef stood tall and motionless. Was it the reef that broke the waves? Or did the waves drown the reef? Who could say for sure who would win and who would lose? However, after this glance, Chu Yang was like a gust of wind, sweeping past Tai Butian's troops like a whirlwind. With a swoosh, he turned into a shadow and disappeared in the direction of the city gate. From the beginning to the end, his gaze never changed. Tai Butian also retracted her gaze calmly, deep in thought. At this moment, it was as if a mottled and broken reflection of time and space had appeared in front of Chu Yang's eyes. This was an extremely mysterious feeling. This was a meeting that was completely outside of fate. Chu Yang was a little lost in thought as he recalled the scene at that time. A look of reminiscence appeared on his face. He didn't expect that at that time. Not only did he have such a feeling, Tai Butian also had the same feeling. Two people who shouldn't have met at all, outside of fate, met each other. Only Chu Yang knew how wrong it was for the two of them to meet at that time. Because in his previous life, Tai Butian's army was defeated and Iron Cloud was destroyed. It was because he had foreseen all of this in this life, changed everything, and led to their meeting. If that was all, it wouldn't be a big deal. But after you arrived at Iron Cloud Citadel, you immediately opened the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. Tai Butian smiled faintly. Before you came, I was discussing the current situation with Royal Uncle. I asked, how can we turn defeat into victory? Royal Uncle said, the current situation is already impossible to reverse. If we want to turn defeat into victory, we can only do so if heavenly troops and generals appear in Iron Cloud. Hearing the words heavenly troops and generals, Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. The day before, after saying that sentence, the Heavenly Armament Pavilion appeared the next day. Tai Butian smiled. So, I went to see the weapon at the first opportunity. Brother Chu, do you still remember your first customer, a girl in green? Chu Yang was suddenly enlightened. It was also for this reason that Royal Uncle also rushed to the Heavenly Armament Pavilion at the first opportunity. Tai Butian smiled. Heavenly troops and generals have always only appeared in legends. But your appearance was too coincidental. It made Royal Uncle and me feel like we had come back from the jaws of death. I'm even doubting if it's true. Could it be that there were really heavenly troops and generals? Although we knew that this was nonsense, although we knew that the two of us at the highest level of Iron Cloud Citadel believed in this kind of thing, at that time, we were already in despair. We were already at our wits' end. So, things continued like that. Otherwise, did you really think that you, an outsider, could attract the attention of the most important official in the military by coming to Iron Cloud and hanging a few swords? Haha. Tai Butian laughed a little self-deprecatingly. Then we started to get in touch. The first time we met, I also told you what was in my heart. I am not someone who can't keep things in my heart. I also never talked about my hardships. But at that time, I stubbornly believed that if there was still hope for Iron Cloud, then let the heavenly troops and generals turn the situation around. Although it was ridiculous, at that time, I was really in despair. Then you became the pavilion master of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. When I saw that you used a mob to ferret out the spies one by one, Iron Cloud quickly became clean. When I saw that you used any clues to eliminate the hidden dangers, I felt that I did not misjudge you. Until you used many factors to fight against Golden Horse Riders Department in Iron Cloud Citadel, and gained the upper hand, causing the king-level leader of Golden Horse Riders Department to fall here. At that time, I suddenly had confidence. When you were working hard, I worked 10 times harder than you because I could not let your efforts go to waste. Slowly, when everything was on the right track, I realized that I was very dependent on your help. Slowly, from nothing to something, I was very dependent on you. When you were working hard, I was full of energy in handling everything. If I heard that Minister Chu was not in a good mood today, then I also lost the mood to handle official business. Perhaps this is the biggest difference between men and women. Men can suppress these strange thoughts, but women cannot. No matter how strong a woman is, in despair, she will still look for someone to rely on. And you, at that time, gave me the feeling of someone to rely on. Tai Butian smiled sadly. It was also from that time onwards that I would frequently look for you to chat. Perhaps that was the beginning of my feelings for you. Until you left Iron Cloud Citadel for Great Zhao for Iron Cloud. You did not care about your life and death in Great Zhao. I was suddenly shocked by you. During the days when you left, I prayed for your safety every day. I hoped for your return every day. Slowly, when you were not around, my heart fell for you. When I heard that you came back from thousands of miles away, I was excited and immediately went to welcome you. But at that time, the border was in a state of emergency. Later, no matter what the reason was, I finally came to your rescue. However, I found that this heavenly soldier who risked his life for Iron Cloud was infected with lust, so I did not hesitate to save you. I did not hesitate to lose my virginity. Even if people thought that I was a shameless woman, I still wanted you to live. You left and left me with a child. I was sad, but also happy. When Tai Butian was saying these words, she blushed, bashful and gloomy. However, her eyes continued to look at Chu Jiang very brightly. You are here today. You know what happened back then. So, I understand all your feelings. You don't have to explain anything. Tai Butian said deeply. I can understand everything you say, everything you do, and everything you feel. If I were to explain, it would be much clearer than if you were to explain it yourself. I only want to ask you. Tai Butian suddenly stood up and looked at Chu Yang. Who do you think I am? Who do you think I am? Minister Chu was tongue-tied. You think that you can do whatever you want to me just because I cured your poison and gave you my chastity? Tai Butian's face was red, but her eyes were aggressive. You think that you can do whatever you want to me just because I gave birth to a child for you? You think that you have some kind of power over me just because you know the truth? May I ask, Minister Chu, Tribulation Sword Master? Tai Butian covered her clothes and pressed forward. What do you think I am? Do you think I'm just a cheap woman that you can vent your lust on without any feelings? Do you know that although I gave you my chastity and gave birth to your child, my dignity, my pride, I didn't lose anything at all? Tai Butian's eyes were burning. Do you know? I have more self-respect than any other woman in the world. What do you think I am? The moment you came, you tore my clothes and did all these things to me. Am I a mistress that you kept? Am I the kind of shameless woman that seduces men? Am I the kind of brothel girl that you think I am? You know that I like you. I love you with all my heart, and I have already given you everything I have. So, do you think that you are already doing me a great favor by lowering your status to come back to me? No matter how you treat me, I should be willing to do it. Should be grateful to you? Be grateful to you? Because you finally want me. Because you are finally taking responsibility? So I should be grateful to you? So I should accept whatever you do to me? No. I didn't. That's not what I meant. Sweat broke out on Chu Yang's forehead. This, let me explain. You didn't? Tai Butian looked at him. But you did it to me. Have you seen me in female clothes? Have you seen my real face even once? Do you like me? Do you have any romantic feelings for me? You don't? Then why do you despise me so much? Chapter 1195. Chu Yang suddenly felt that he was somewhat ashamed of himself. Tai Butian's words weren't wrong. Her rhetorical questions made him even more speechless. Did he like her? Did he love her? Was it just a responsibility? Was there love between a man and a woman? Tai Butian's lips were trembling. I like you? Chu Yang, I love you too. I like you so much that I almost have no sense of self. Every night you appear in my dreams. I can do anything for you and I'm willing for you to do anything for me. But I don't want you to treat me as your responsibility, do you understand? I don't want to be any burden to you, do you understand? I don't want to be a tool for you to vent your desires. Do you understand? I want to be a complete woman. Even if you don't like me, my love is still complete. I just don't want you to trample on it. Chu Yang's face was pale. That's all I have to say. Tai Batian exhaled and said apologetically, I'm sorry. Chu Yang, I shouldn't have spoken to you like this. I don't want the man I like to feel bad for me. She paused for a moment and said, I'm done. Chu Yang, it's true that I like you and love you, but it's also true that you don't like me and love me. That's all I have to say. If you still want to do something to me, I won't resist you either. If you insist on wanting me, I'll give it to you. I'll do my best to make you happy. But this is because I like you, not because you like me. She closed her eyes and said, Chu Yang, if you want to do something, then what are you waiting for? Chu Yang staggered backward and said in a trembling voice, Don't force me. Tai Batian closed her eyes and stood upright. 2 streams of tears flowed down from the corners of her eyes. I admit that I've never seen you before. After I found out about what happened to you, I felt guilty toward you. Even if there was love, it was also out of guilt. I did this to you because, as you said, we already have a child together. I didn't think it was wrong, but I didn't think that this would hurt you deeply. I went overboard with what happened today. Chu Yang said solemnly. I apologize to you. I've never loved you before, and I don't have any romantic feelings for you. I admit it. Right now, I only have a man's desire to conquer you. I admit it. Following Chu Yang's narration, Tai Batian closed her eyes in despair, her heart as cold as ice. But Chu Yang raised his head and looked at her with clear eyes. No matter what you say, we are already inseparable. This is also a fact. You are my woman, that is unchangeable. We have children together, that is undeniable. Batian, I will try my best to make myself like you, any bit of you, and make myself love you. Chu Yang walked forward slowly, and gently held Tai Batian in his arms. He said softly, I will make you a happy woman. I will also make you feel that your feelings for me are not in vain. At that time, you will naturally be able to tell whether my feelings for you are sincere or not, and whether they come from my own heart, or because of the child and my responsibility. If I can't do that, I won't touch a single strand of your hair. So, please give me a little time. Chu Yang hugged her gently and said in her ear, I, Chu Yang, am not a good person either. But would you believe me if I were to be a complete hooligan? Tai Batian smiled with tears in her eyes and said softly, I believe you. She raised her head and opened her eyes. Looking at Chu Yang, she asked, Aren't you a hooligan? Chu Yang smiled. When I fall in love with you, you will realize that my hooliganism is something you can't handle. Tai Batian's face flushed red at once. She lowered her head in shame and embarrassment. The conversation between the two was very serious, but when it came to the last 2 sentences, the two of them coincidentally adopted a relaxed way of talking, uniformly and tacitly alleviating the tense atmosphere between them. Both of them were smart people. They would never let the situation between them become irreparable. Just as Chu Yang had said, what had already happened would never change. The existence of the child made the two of them even more inseparable. Since that was the case, why not face it together and work hard together to change this situation? It's just that, I'm very sorry. Chu Yang's voice was very pained. You are not the only one in my heart. There are others as well. So, Tai Batian smiled softly and said, The one who should be sorry is me, right? You only have one heart from the beginning to the end. It's just that since you know about this matter, you can't possibly abandon it. So you want to force yourself to divide your heart? Chu Yang took a deep breath and nodded. You can say that. I didn't want you to know about it previously precisely because of this. Tai Batian smiled and said gently, It would be best if I could keep it a secret forever. Even if you didn't know, you wouldn't be worse than a pig or a dog. You wouldn't feel guilty either. Therefore, your state of mind would still be perfect. But since you know about it, I won't ask you to abandon us either. That would also be a kind of cruelty to you. Tai Butian smiled lightly. With my status, I can't be a good wife for you either. She deliberately sighed. Besides, a playboy like you hasn't taken a fancy to me yet. Chu Jiang couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. At this moment, he truly realized Tai Butian's good points. This woman was usually decisive in killing, controlling the world and ruling over the world. But she was extremely considerate towards him. She knew all his feelings like the back of her hand. Every word she said was to avoid making things difficult for him. Chu Jiang sighed and said emotionally, "But Ian, if only you weren't the emperor, how good would you be?" The depths of Tai Butian's eyes lit up. She clearly received the pity in Chu Yang's words. She murmured, "Chu Jiang, you're already starting to like me a little." Chu Yang chuckled and the two of them parted ways. Chu Yang looked at Tai Butian sincerely and said softly, "I hope you can forgive me for what happened today." Tai Butian raised her head and looked at Chu Yang. Her face was a little red, but she said calmly and softly, "Do you know, the greatest good thing about you is that unless you don't do anything wrong, once you're really in the wrong, you'll never deny it, shirk responsibility, or defend yourself. I like it very much." After a pause, she said solemnly, "I forgive you." Chu Yang heaved a sigh of relief and said softly, "Thank you. You know, we need to start afresh. I don't want to leave any bad impression in your heart." Tai Butian's eyes moved and she said with a smile, "But us women only love one person in our lives. If we don't cherish it and force ourselves to leave a knot in our hearts, isn't that very stupid?" She smiled softly. "As a woman, we have to cherish ourselves. We have to cherish what we have," she said softly. "Life is short." Chu Yang chuckled and found another good thing about this intelligent woman. She was open-minded. Chu Yang suddenly thought of something. "Oh right, how did you know that I'm the Tribulation Sword Master?" Tai Butian smiled mischievously. "I've already consumed the heavy elixir that you left for me." She sighed a little despondently. "It's a pity that although there's a Tribulation Sword Master in this world, there's still a gap of a year after all. If Father could hold on for a little longer." Chu Jiang also nodded heavily. Tai Butian's words were right. When Tai Shiqing died, Chu Yang hadn't obtained any of the great elixirs. He only needed a little more than half a year to get them. But he ultimately couldn't hold on for another half a year. Especially now, Chu Yang sighed even more. Tai Butian was a woman, and also his woman. If Tai Shiqing could live, then, how wonderful would it be for his family to reunite and return to the upper three heavens peacefully and happily? All the mess in the lower three heavens could be left to his father-in-law to deal with. But now, it's too late to say anything. "So you knew that it was a heavy elixir? And confirmed my identity as the Tribulation Sword Master?" Chu Yang's eyes flashed. "No. It was when the child was born that my master confirmed the heavy pill. But," Tai Butian smiled faintly, "since I know that you are the master of Calamity Sword, how could I leak this information? That's why I'm the only one who knows about your identity. And I've never told anyone about the person who gave me the heavy elixir." Chu Yang was startled. "Your master?" Tai Butian smiled. "My father's name is Lan Meisien." She paused and said softly and slowly, "He's from the Lan clan of the upper three heavens." Chu Yang made an sound and was momentarily stunned. Then, he broke out in cold sweat. He really didn't expect this. Tai Butian's master was actually Lan Meisien. And he even kept the heavy elixir back then. If not for Tai Butian's meticulous thinking, perhaps his identity would have been known by all the heavens by now. Thinking of how Lan Meisien's life was uncertain under his sword, Chu Yang felt a little guilty. "She doesn't know, right? Am I such an ignorant person?" Tai Butian rolled her eyes at him. Then, Tai Butian seemed to have thought of something and her pretty face turned red. "Why are you blushing?" Chu Yang asked curiously. It seems like your mother is my senior sister, Tai Batian said hesitantly. Ah. Chu Yang was really shocked. He had never thought about this in the past. He had always thought that Yang Rulin came from a family. Moreover, Yang Rulin had never revealed her cultivation in front of him, so he really didn't know who his mother's master was. He didn't expect it to be Lan Meixian. Chu Yang was a little dizzy. The two people who were closest to him were both Lan Meixian's disciples. And Lan Meixian's life-threatening sword move was created by him? This matter seemed a little troublesome. In that case, do I still have to call you Junior Martial Ant? Chu Yang's eyes widened. Tai Batian blushed and pouted. If you want to call me Junior Martial Ant, that's up to you. Chu Yang sighed. No wonder the ancients said that if you want to learn, you have to sleep with your Junior Martial Ant. The next moment, Minister Chu was engulfed by a wave of angry punches. Then, he was kicked in the stomach. He grimaced in pain as he was thrown out of the room. This woman was truly worthy of being an emperor. She was so violent. Can I say that the 2 chapters of the push and tumble play that I've written are all wasted today? Sigh. I was originally complacent about having 2 chapters saved. Damn it. Looks like I'm not the kind of person who can save chapters. That time, I ended up sleeping for 2 days and used it. That time, I ended up catching a cold and used it. Another time, my computer broke down and both computers were scrapped at the same time. Then this time, the plot changed and it was gone. Chapter 1196. Tai Batian was feeling awkward. She and this guy's mother were martial sisters, but she had fallen in love with this guy. She couldn't bring herself to do this. Now that everything was out in the open, what should she do when they met? It was hard for an ugly daughter-in-law to avoid meeting her in-laws. This guy actually said something like that. He really didn't know what was good for him. Thinking of that martial sister come mother-in-law, Tai Batian couldn't help but feel embarrassed. I heard that my mother met you. Chu Yang stood up, holding his stomach. He tilted his head and sized up the beauty in front of him. Tai Batian felt bitter. So it was indeed my martial sister who told you? Chu Yang denied. Definitely not. Chu Yang thought to himself. Although his mother also said it, the first person to say it was not her. Hua Batian snorted. Then it was Qianqian. Chu Yang sighed and said, It was Qianqian. Qianqian found me. Then, in a battle, she took a fatal blow for me. On her deathbed, she told me about you. Sigh. How is Qianqian? Tai Batian was shocked. She grabbed his wrist. On her deathbed? What about her? She is still unconscious. I need to find the right medicine to wake her up, said Chu Yang. Tai Batian felt a little relieved. She gritted her teeth and said, Chu Yang, if you let Qianqian down, then you really shouldn't. This girl is too silly. She and Wu Qianqian were in the same boat. At this moment, when she realized that Wu Qianqian actually didn't forget to remind Chu Yang about this matter before she died, she couldn't help but feel grateful. Although she had never thought of accompanying Chu Yang from the start, and had never thought of keeping Chu Yang for herself, how could she not have fantasized about it? Which young girl didn't want to be together with the person she loved for the rest of her life? Even though Tai Batian was a ruler, she also had the same feelings of a girl. She also had dreams. It was just that she didn't want to make things difficult for the person she loved, so she restrained herself. Wu Qianqian's words pierced through the last layer of window paper. At this moment, the door of the imperial study opened with a creak. A small figure staggered in. He raised his head and said in a childish voice, Are you guys done? I regret. This shout was like a thunderclap in spring. The two of them immediately panicked. They quickly separated and nervously checked their clothes. It was as if a couple had been caught red-handed by their husband or wife. Chu Yang turned his head to look, and saw that the little guy was staring at him curiously with his black eyes. He was scrutinizing Chu Yang with curiosity. Chu Yang blinked and felt that something was wrong. He almost suspected that he had seen wrongly, But when he took a closer look, it was indeed correct. Yes, this little fellow who looked exactly like him was indeed looking at him with a curious and scrutinizing gaze. It was as if he had seen a piece of pork in the market, and was hesitating whether he should buy it and bring it home. How could a little child have such a gaze? Minister Chu felt a little dizzy. However, she saw the little fellow trying his best to walk over step by step. He was still a little shaky. He walked to Tai Butian's side and hugged her calf. Then, he raised his head and said, "Mother, I'm hungry." It was only then that Tai Butian remembered that in her panic, she had chased everyone out of the bedchamber. To think that the Grand Highness had actually come over on his own without anyone looking after him. "Little Yang Yang, how did you find this place?" Tai Butian was also a little dizzy. She picked up her son and asked. Her son seemed to have only learned how to walk for 3 months. Moreover, the little fellow was a little lazy. He had never walked such a long distance by himself. "Is this very difficult to find?" The 1-year-old little fellow's round eyes were actually somewhat disdainful. "Mother, you're either in the diligent government hall, in the morning court, or in the bedchamber. Most of the time, you're in the imperial study." Tai Butian's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. The little fellow spoke in an organized manner. Ever since he learned how to speak, this was the first time she had seen him speak so much. Tai Butian had been worried for a long time that he might stutter. Now, this little fellow actually spoke so fluently. Chu Yang had originally wanted to go up and tease him immediately, and then quickly close the distance between him and his father and successfully nurture a fatherly relationship. Finally, they would jointly attack Tai Butian. Chu Yang knew very well that children were always the greatest weapon against women. As long as his son was willing to leave with him. Then Tai Butian would have to leave even if she didn't want to. Even if she didn't want to accept it, she would have to accept it. But before he had time to sit up, he heard these words. Suddenly, he stood still as if he had been struck by lightning. He clearly heard the sound of his jaw hitting the ground. This is the speech of a 1-year-old child? This tone, he's practically an experienced person. Minister Chu was flabbergasted. He turned his head to look, and saw that the young man was looking at him with his big round eyes. He coughed dryly and said, "Little Yang Yang. Cough, cough, do you know me?" The little fellow rolled his eyes and ignored him. Tai Butian was about to call the palace maids to prepare dinner. Chu Yang asked curiously, "Can't you just feed him milk?" The moment he heard about feeding milk, the little fellow's eyes lit up. Tai Butian's face flushed red. She snorted and said, "Once a child is 1 year old, he can't be fed milk. To train a child's willpower, we have to start from weaning. You don't know anything, what nonsense are you spouting? These are the rules of the imperial family's training program." The moment the little fellow heard that he couldn't be fed milk, he immediately lowered his head dejectedly. Chu Yang was flabbergasted. He can't be fed milk when he's 1 year old? What kind of absurd statement is this? This means, this child has really suffered by your side. Tai Butian was enraged. "My son, you've suffered by following me? What do you know? This little rascal is the reincarnation of a lazy worm. Other than the few months when he first learned how to crawl and walk, he was a little more lively. Now, if he can sit, he definitely won't stand. If he can lie, he definitely won't sit. If he can walk, he definitely won't run. I really don't know who he took after for his laziness. He's that awesome?" Chu Yang was flabbergasted. "Give it to me." Tai Butian stretched out her hand. "Give what to me?" Chu Yang was confused. "That piece of jade." Tai Butian's face flushed red. She gritted her teeth. "Are you going to let me go out like this?" Oh. Chu Yang hurriedly took it out and exclaimed, "This is really good stuff. I wonder if I'll turn into a woman if I wear it?" Tai Butian rolled her eyes at him. She wore the jade around her neck and instantly regained the demeanor of an emperor. Chu Yang was once again dumbfounded by what he saw. In this aspect, the old clearly couldn't compare to the young. The little fellow was already used to it, and didn't react at all. "Wait here." I'll make the arrangements. Tai Butian waved her hand in an imposing manner. Yes, your humble servant obeys. Chu Yang bowed in a peculiar manner. The two of them smiled at the same time, instantly feeling as if spring had arrived. Tai Butian walked out, summoned the palace maids and instructed them. Everyone in the palace returned. Your Majesty, Prime Minister Wang and the others are worried. They'd been waiting outside the hall for a long time. A sharp voice sounded. I'll go take a look. Tai Butian frowned and was about to carry her son out. I'll take care of the child first. Chu Yang hurriedly volunteered. Go do your things. Tai Butian snorted. She understood his sinister intentions, but she still placed Tai Yang in his arms and hurriedly left. Chu Yang only felt a warm and soft ball land in his arms. In that instant, he was intoxicated and extremely satisfied. This is my son. Yes, my son. Chuckling, Chu Yang lowered his head and stretched out his mouth, as if he wanted to kiss this pink little face. Smack! The moment he kissed it, he realized that the texture was not quite right. He looked down and realized that he had kissed the back of a small hand. He was stunned to see that this small hand had already placed her palm on the position that he wanted to kiss. She was looking at him with a face full of disgust. Chu Yang scratched his head. This little fellow's reaction was quite fast. He tilted his head and kissed him again. The little fellow blocked this side, that side, that side, that side. But he was a 1-year-old after all. How could he resist? In an instant he lost his guard. His pink little face was kissed until it was covered in saliva. I say. Chu Yang was having fun kissing him when he saw that the little fellow didn't block anymore. Instead, he asked in a strange tone, Is your mouth clean? Chu Yang was stunned. Is my mouth clean? Kissing here and there. You feel blissful, but I feel disgusted. The little fellow stretched out a pink little hand and wiped his face forcefully. He tilted his head and rolled his eyes. Chu Yang looked at the little guy in his arms, and was startled. She couldn't help but hold him a little further away to size him up. Not bad, he's only 2 feet long. At most, he weighs 15 pounds. Such a little thing, if he can speak a complete sentence, he's already a genius. How can he speak with a similar tone as me? I'm a clean person. The little fellow stretched out a finger and pointed it straight at the tip of Chu Yang's nose. He accused him seriously. In the future, without my permission, you are not allowed to kiss me. Chu Yang was confused. He turned to look at the door, anxious to find Tai Butian. Fuck, you gave birth to. What kind of freak was this? You little fellow, do you know who I am? Chu Yang frowned and looked at the little fellow closely. I've heard of you for a long time. The little fellow was in his arms. His 2 chubby little hands were hugged in front of his chest. He raised his hands and shook them. Then, he cupped his hands in greeting. Chu Yang! Yes, my father. Chu Yang's shock was no small matter. He almost let go of the little fellow and let him fall to the ground. His 2 eyes widened into 2 round bells. You know me? Of course. The little fellow rolled his eyes. How did you know me? Chu Yang's eyes almost fell out of their sockets. Sigh. My mother has never worn female clothes in front of others before. Secondly, when she sleeps, she often calls your name in her dreams. Little Tai Yang rolled his eyes. And I was born. The little fellow looked at Chu Yang unhappily. Old Chu, do you understand? Old Chu? Chapter 1197. What the little guy said was not wrong at all. But was this something that a child who was not even 1.5 years old could say? Oh! Chu Yang face-bombed. He was truly devastated. Who hadn't seen a 1-year-old child before? Which one wasn't full of shit and pee? He would call his grandmother Shorty and his mother Man. He would always wear a diaper in his pants. If he wasn't careful, he would pee all over you. If he was unhappy, he would poop on your pants. At this age, to be able to clearly and fluently address one's relatives and elders without getting it wrong was already a surprise that exceeded everyone's expectations. But Chu Yang's child was obviously much more advanced than this stage that everyone knew. He was so advanced that he could discuss life with Chu Yang, talk about ideals and talk about picking up girls. Chu Yang felt that this was absolutely ridiculous. He even felt that in front of this monstrous child, he could discuss the general situation of the world and the situation of the heavenly layer with him. It seemed absolutely feasible. Chu Yang had always been the one who shocked others. But this time, Minister Chu was shocked by his 1-year-old and 2-month-old son, whom he had just met for the first time. He was so shocked that he felt dizzy and confused. Now, this little guy was in his arms and was being hugged by him. And he was calling him like an old man. Old Chu, do you understand? Chu Yang said hesitantly. I don't understand. How do you want me to understand? Son, you are only 1 year and 2 months old. Taiyang raised his little face. Old Chu, in this world there is a kind of person called a genius. This time, Chu Yang nodded like a chicken pecking rice. It seemed that this son of his was not a genius. But he was already a monstrous genius. Son, are you fucking reincarnated from some old man? Chu Yang suddenly looked at this little guy and thought of his reincarnation experience. He asked vigilantly. With that brain of yours, you know about reincarnation? Taiyang snorted. The old man attached himself to my body. That is not reincarnation, it is possession. And a newborn child is not to be taken away. Do you understand? Once that is done, both souls will be destroyed. Do you understand? Chu Yang scratched his head. Then what's the matter with you? Taiyang sighed deeply and said faintly. Old Chu, I can only say, this is a very miraculous thing. Yes, it's just that I've been reincarnated, but I'm lucky that my true spirit hasn't been destroyed, and some things haven't disappeared. However, I'm definitely your son. You can rest assured about that. Otherwise, I wouldn't dare to expose myself in front of you like this. Why do you dare to reveal that I'm your father? Chu Yang was very puzzled. The little fellow said deeply. Old Chu, that's because you can accept it. What did you call me? Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. Old Chu, you're already very impressive for me to call you Old Chu. The little guy looked at Chu Yang with a look that said, You should be honored that I called you that. It was a look of approval, commendation, and recognition. Little bastard! Call me father! Minister Chu had been called Old Chu 3 times in a row. So, he finally reacted. He flew into a rage and roared. Little bastard, you're still so lawless? Old Chu? Old Chu is not for you to fucking call me that. Old Chu is honored? The little fellow's face twisted in despair. You want to scold me and hit me, that's your right. I can't stop you from being a father, but you can't call me a little bastard. I'm your son, if I become a little bastard. Then won't you go? Won't I spank your ass into 8 pieces? Before the little fellow's voice died away, Chu Yang had already flipped him over angrily and slapped his fat little butt. Smack. I won't say it. The little fellow tactfully shut his mouth. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. Do you still dare to call me Old Chu? Chu Yang was majestic and murderous, showing the majesty of a father. However, looking at the 5 red fingerprints on the little fellow's butt, he felt a little heartache. He comforted himself in his heart. This little bastard is so monstrous, he can withstand it. You're in trouble. After being slapped, the little fellow naturally didn't cry. He only looked at Chu Yang gloatingly. There's a handprint on my butt, right? When mother comes over later, I'll take off my pants for her to see. Then I'll cry. I'm not afraid to tell you, my tears will come at any time. I'll definitely cry myself hoarse. The little fellow looked at Chu Yang gloatingly. Let's see who's the one suffering then. Chu Yang was flustered and immediately retreated. Ancestor. You're not my son, you're my ancestor. Taiyang's little face was full of naughty smiles. And not only that. If that's all, won't it be too easy for you? You want to build a relationship. I can completely give you a chance to destroy everything. Even if you build a little with your flowery words, as long as I'm here, I guarantee that it will immediately turn into ashes. As long as I'm here, don't even think about hugging the beauty. It's all because of this slap of yours. The little fellow said hatefully. My dear ancestor. Chu Yang wanted to cry but had no tears. Damn it, other people's children were all beaten and scolded by their fathers as they liked. My child is actually threatening me. Is there any justice in this world? Do you surrender? The little fellow looked playfully at his strict father. Surrender? Chu Yang hung his head dejectedly. Do you think that you can make my palm print disappear just because of your weak and unconvincing surrender? The little fellow was unforgiving. In your dreams. What do I have to do to make you give up? Chu Yang lowered his voice and gritted his teeth as he asked. 2 conditions. As long as you promise me, not only will I listen to you, but I'll also call you father from now on. Moreover, I'll be responsible for helping you chase after my mother. Yes, your wife. The little fellow stretched out 2 white and tender fingers and waved them in front of Chu Yang. Looking at the 2 waving fingers in front of him, Minister Chu's mood was really complicated. It was as if a bottle of 5 different flavors had been knocked over. Sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and salty all surged up at the same time. For a moment, he actually felt like crying. If his brothers knew that he had been bullied to this extent by a 1-year-old child, Gu Du Xing, Dong Wushan, and Mo Tianji would probably only have internal injuries from laughing. However, GMO, Luo Kudi, and the others would definitely laugh themselves to death. Especially Ray Butong, he would definitely laugh until his own cultivation level increased greatly. And it would increase greatly. There was no need to doubt this. What conditions? Chu Yang's mood was dry as he raised the white flag. Damn it, I'll deal with you when I'm old. I'm already an old celery seller. How can I not pinch a handful of coriander like you? The first problem is that I have no problem naming myself, right? Tai Yang curled his lips. Like the current Tai Yang. It's so unpleasant to hear. No matter how tall and straight a poplar tree is, isn't it still a poplar tree? It's just a pile of firewood. My mother's ability to name is really terrible. Chu Yang's slap was a little itchy. He forcibly controlled his impulse to slap him. He swallowed his saliva and said, We can talk about it. Although my mother did it because she missed you, she can't use my name as a joke. The little guy stretched his legs comfortably. Then, he stretched out his chubby little legs that looked like lotuses. He tapped Chu Yang's chin with his big toe and said, Names are very important. It's related to one's future. It's better to be domineering. Domineering? Chu Yang was stunned. Then how about Chubatian? Vulgar. 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 The little guy was furious. Then I might as well be called Chu-Chu-Tian. What's Batian? I can even eat the heavens. Then you'll be called Chu-Chu-Tian. Chu Yang decided. No way. The little guy was completely speechless. Even if you follow the poll, you can't do it like that, then it's settled. Chu Yang said without any doubt. Your nickname will be Go Dan. I object. The little guy kicked his legs. Your objection is invalid. Chu Yang snorted. The little guy rolled his eyes. But my mother's name is Tai Batian. I can't have the same name as her. Besides, she nourishes the heavens and I eat humans. What's the point of going against her? This is the sin of being unfilial. Then you'll be called Chu-Chiti. Chu Yang already had a plan. Little bastard, you actually know the sin of being unfilial. Chu-Chu-Tian is the most domineering. There won't be anyone with the same name. Hulu. Xuan. The little guy really wanted to cry. Then what do you want to be called? Chu Yang asked modestly. I like Kwang. How about Chu Kwang? The little guy obviously realized that the guy in front of him was not easy to deal with, so he used a negotiating tone. Chu Kwang, Chu Yang said. It lacks some charm. Chu Kwang too? The little guy persevered and discussed tirelessly. How about Chu Kwangren? Chu Yang fainted. What kind of messy names were these? How did this guy think of them? Then I'll choose these two. The little guy compared and said, How about this? I'll be called Chukwangren. Regarding the name change, after you decide that my mother's your wife, you go and tell her that you thought of it. You must decide on it. He had actually made a decision in such a short time. He just said that he could choose one out of the two, but now he did not even have the chance to choose one out of the two. Chu Yang, the father, stared with his eyes wide open. Even the right to participate was taken away. The suffocation at this moment was really no small matter. He panted heavily. Fuck your mother, you little bastard! It's really unbearable for me. The little guy snorted and tilted his head disdainfully. If you didn't, you wouldn't have me. Chu Yang was immediately blinded by anger. So he spoke without thinking. What do you know? I was fucked at that time. Fucked? The little guy looked at his father in astonishment. Suddenly he opened his mouth and burst into laughter. Only the heavens knew what kind of scene it was for a 1-year-old child to laugh so boldly and with such an expression as if he was about to fall apart, and had a dumbfounded look in his eyes. Chu Yang's face was filled with black lines. He hurriedly changed the topic. Why do you have to be called Chukwangren? Chapter 1198. Stop! Chu Yang hurriedly stopped him. What's wrong? The little fellow shook his head and wagged his tail proudly. What do you mean? Why don't I understand? Chu Yang frowned. I understand the first sentence, but this Phoenix song laughing at Kong Chiu. What does it mean? Phoenix song? What song is that? Kong Chiu. What is it? A hill full of holes? And this yellow crane tower? Where is it? The little fellow broke down. He stared at Chu Yang speechlessly. Such a famous sentence. I really have nothing to say to you. Chu Yang touched his nose and thought. Did I embarrass myself? He had no choice but to change the topic. What's your second condition? The second condition is to be as lenient with me as possible. The little fellow pouted. Don't meddle in everything. Also, I should have my own room. If you satisfy these two conditions, I'll help you. Chu Yang was stunned. Help me? Help you woo your wife? The little fellow said like an expert. With my help, you'll definitely get twice the result with half the effort. Do you believe me? I believe you. Chu Yang nodded heavily. The father and son looked at each other and nodded. Then, the little fellow reached out his small hand and Chu Yang reached out his large hand. The two shook hands in a proper manner. An agreement was reached. At this moment, the palace maid had already prepared the bird's nest porridge and brought it over. A few people followed behind, carrying more than 10 side dishes and various snacks. In front of you, I can only stuff my mouth with food, the little fellow muttered in an almost inaudible voice and started to eat. Chu Yang sat on the chair, resting his chin on his hands. He looked at his son and thought about those words. Yes, there was one thing that was undeniable. That was probably a poem. Halfway through, Tai but Ian hurried back and saw her son chewing on the table while Chu Yang, the father, was actually watching at the side. She was instantly furious. Even if you've never raised a child before, you should just forget about it. You should have seen it before, right? Such a young child, what if he chokes while eating? What if he chokes? Don't you know how to feed him? Upon hearing this, the two men rolled their eyes at the same time. Feed? Chu Yang roared in his heart. Damn it, let this little bastard feed me. You want me to feed him? What a joke. Then, he racked his brains to find an excuse. That's not it. It's just that, we need to train him to be independent from a young age. Otherwise, he would suffer greatly in the future. The sooner he trained, the better. Now it seems. For a child of this size. It was a little cruel, but it was for his long-term future. But it's the best thing. Tai Bakian was about to speak when she heard an excited cry from the side. Wow! Tai Bakian turned to look, only to see the little fellow's chubby face covered in vegetable juice. With an innocent and excited face, she said, Imperial Mother, this uncle is right. Eating by myself is indeed more delicious than being fed by others. It's really delicious. His face was pure and innocent, childish and adorable. Chu Yang vomited and turned his face away. Good girl, little Yan Yang. Is it really delicious? Tai Batian asked lovingly. That's right, that's right. The little guy nodded his head like he was pounding garlic. Tai Batian heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he gave Chu Yang an apologetic look, as if to say, You're right. I've wronged you. I didn't expect you to be an expert in raising children. Chu Yang pretended to be sanctimonious, and accepted all of them. Then, he revealed a confident smile. In fact, he was laughing bitterly in his heart, cursing silently. Little bastard! Tai Batian picked up the teacup and drank some water, watching her son eat lovingly. The next moment, the little fellow said something. Tai Batian choked on a mouthful of water. Imperial Mother, this uncle is so nice. Let's make him my daddy, okay? Tai Batian choked so much that she almost couldn't breathe. This sentence came out of the blue. Let's make him my daddy, okay? Tai Batian turned and looked at Chu Yang questioningly. Chu Yang looked like he was about to break down. He spread his hands, indicating that he didn't do anything. Tai Batian frowned deeply. She murmured, Is this the nature of a father? Pfft. Chu Yang spat out a mouthful of tea. Pfft. The little fellow, who was eating bird's nest porridge, turned his head and spat a mouthful of porridge right on Chu Yang's face. In the afternoon, Tai Batian naturally had to continue dealing with official matters, so the task of taking care of the little fellow still fell on Chu Yang's shoulders. Play with him for a while. If you're interested, tell him some stories. Tai Batian wanted to say something but hesitated. She knew that since her son had such a sword master as his father, his life would probably be stormy. Let Chu Yang tell a few stories for the little fellow to listen to, or perhaps experience it himself. The earlier he could gain some experience. Chu Yang nodded repeatedly. He hurriedly sent the queen away and turned around. The father and son pair stared at each other. Chu Yang immediately dismissed the palace maids and eunuchs. Only then did he remember something. Ever since he came here, he hadn't seen the two of them. What did those two people do? He suppressed this question first. The king of Hell Chu looked at his son. No matter how he looked at him, it was strange. I think you need to give me an explanation. Chu Yang put his face in front of the little pink face and said very seriously. Don't use the reason of the immortality of the true spirit to fool me. In this world, there are hundreds of thousands of people who die every day. The number of people that I, your father, have killed with my own hands is probably 70 to 80,000. If I were to come back like this after death, I believe that no one would be able to accept it. Tai Yang blinked his little eyes and said, I knew that you would definitely have doubts. But of course I have to tell you. When people die, they will be reincarnated. After going through the path of reincarnation, they will be reincarnated as plants, trees or animals. These don't have any true spirit. The path of reincarnation is to destroy the soul and erase the memories, leaving only a little soul imprint for reincarnation. Of course, they won't remember anything. If everyone could reincarnate like this, then the whole world would have been in chaos. Only when one's cultivation reaches a certain level, can he use all his cultivation to transform into soul energy to protect himself and pass through the path of reincarnation to be reincarnated as a human with memories. But in this case, even in the whole world, the number of people who can have this kind of cultivation is definitely not more than one person. The little guy said, Who is this person? Then which one of the people are you? Chu Yang asked. Could it be that this son of his was the reincarnation of some almighty person? This person's name. Even if I told you, you wouldn't know. And I definitely don't belong to any of the people. The little guy thought for a long time and said, I don't know if you've heard of the immortal spirit? Immortal spirit? Chu Yang frowned. I've never heard of it. If you haven't heard of it, it's more troublesome to explain. The little guy blinked and said, You can say that. When the world was first created, a group of almighty people were born. Only after that did the human race multiply, and this space. Everything that can give birth to these primitive humans is a unique space. It's called the space of the heavenly way. In the space of the heavenly way, it's filled with a kind of special life energy. It's after this life energy was absorbed that humans were born. This life energy. It's called the origin of the heavenly way. Only trillions of heavenly way origin particles can give birth to one immortal spirit. Every immortal spirit has a complete trajectory of the heavenly way on its body. Of course, after the immortal spirit is born, it's possible that it's absorbed into the cultivator's body and become a part of his cultivation. And as long as one can absorb the immortal spirit, every one of them can later grow into a powerful person who can turn the world upside down. Later on, the heavenly way changed greatly, and the space of the heavenly way suddenly closed. The immortal spirits were sealed in the space. I don't know how many years passed. Immortal spirits were constantly disappearing, because even though the immortal spirits' bodies were so small that they couldn't be seen, they already had their own intelligence. After a long period of loneliness, they would also collapse. I'm the last immortal spirit in the space of the heavenly way. The little guy pointed at his own nose. At this point, Chu Yang was already dumbfounded. He never thought that such a wonderful thing could happen in the world, and such a wonderful thing actually happened to him. At a certain point in time, after I absorbed all the immortal spirits that collapsed along the way, I realized that I could sense the summoning of some powerful cultivators from the outside world. That was the fluctuation that was emitted when the Almighty was engulfing the world. So I tried to penetrate in that direction. I don't know how many years passed, but I suddenly succeeded in breaking through. Then, very happily, I rushed to the summoner. Then I realized that this summoner, he was actually using the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to refine a sword. So I was sealed in this sword, following the owner of the sword to roam the world unhindered. The owner of the sword changed from generation to generation, but no one ever discovered my existence. I had no concept of time at all in that strange place. Anyway, I couldn't get out. After experiencing the changes of one dynasty after another, in the end, this sword was placed on a shelf, and was worshipped as a supreme symbol. Then a war broke out, this sword was stolen, and countless people fought over it. At that time, I realized that I was strong enough to break free. So I struggled violently in a battle, and this sword broke. Then I was free. The first thought of the free me was to be a human. Because being a human has endless fun. So I wanted to be a human, and not be something that the naked eye can't see anymore. So, after I continued to wander in the human world for many years, I learned some things that I could learn, and I felt that it was enough, so I entered the reincarnation passage without any hesitation. Then when I reappeared, I was here. The little guy looked at his father and said, "In this life, it was my first time reincarnating as a human." Chu Yang was dumbfounded, and his brain couldn't wrap itself around it. He said, "But you told me the truth the first time we met." This still makes me puzzled. The reason is very simple, because you have the existence of the path of heaven. The little guy was very excited, and his eyes shone. This is the real reason. Chu Yang's heart shook, and he thought of the Calamity Sword. Wasn't the Calamity Sword filled with the path of heaven? Chapter 1199. Heavenly Way. Tribulation Sword. Heavenly Way. Chu Yang was lost in thought for a long time. He always felt that there seemed to be a line leading him. Every step he took seemed to be exactly on the same point. Rebirth, tribulation, meeting Butian in Iron Cloud, meeting Du Xing in the Heavenly Army, Spirit Mist and Vitality Spring, becoming sworn brothers, fighting Qingru with wisdom and bravery, the sudden appearance of the Black Demon. At this stage, his thoughts and goals could be said to have been led to the upper three heavens. Then, the heavenly secrets revolved and Diwu decided to let go. He went up to the upper three heavens, but the first person he met after going up was his father, who paved the way for him to go up to the upper three heavens. And so on, when Buluqing and Ningtianya appeared, and the big clans ruled, the upper three heavens became a matter of course. After going to the upper three heavens, he came out of the southeast and met Zhiqiang. He knew about the heavenly imperial court, and Zhiqiang's departure seemed to have pointed him in a direction. At that time, he had found out that he had a son in the lower three heavens. And his son's mother and his own mother were actually martial sisters. This was very strange. But he had finally come down with great difficulty. And his son turned out to be some immortal spirit. Moreover, it involved the heavenly law space. What was very obvious was that the heavenly way space was a higher level than the heavenly imperial court. And when such a thing came out of his son's mouth, it made Chu Yang feel even more absurd, as if it was a recurring cycle. If his guess was not wrong, then the tribulation sword was the path of the heavenly way, and should stop when it finally reached the heavenly way space. In this world, there was nothing beyond it. It was as if there was a line in the unseen world that was pulling him towards the peak step by step. But Chu Yang still felt uncomfortable. Facing this kid in front of him, Chu Yang's mood was still very strange. This was a feeling that was both familiar and strange, both intimate and somewhat distant. He couldn't help but sigh deeply. "I can't accept what you said." Chu Yang put his son down and let him sit cross-legged on the grass. He sat in front of him and said, "My original plan was to come here. To see an innocent son, to clear the misunderstanding with Butian and reveal the truth. To let him acknowledge his roots and ancestors. I came full of excitement and happiness, but I saw an evildoer. If you don't tell me. At most, I think that my son is a genius, and I'm very happy about it. But you told me everything, and I'm at my wit's end. That kind of fatherly love." Chu Yang was somewhat melancholic. "Do you understand? I have no choice, because I can't wait any longer," the little fellow said innocently as he spread out his hands. "Can't wait any more?" Chu Yang repeated in bewilderment. "There are two reasons." The little guy stretched his legs, and his childish face was filled with a chilling seriousness. "I've never had a family, and I've never had a mother. Now I have one. My mother loved and cherished me wholeheartedly. This feeling let me intoxicated. I was carried by my mother for 10 months, after all. That's my mother. I don't want my mother to be hurt. I hope you can give her happiness. But from the current situation, you are at most a passer-by. My mother will never leave with you. You will leave soon. As long as you leave, my mother will not be happy. So I want you to get my mother's approval in the shortest time possible. To obtain my Nyang's approval," the little fellow said, "let her have some hope. Live happily. This is my wish," the little fellow said with a voice full of admiration. "Only you can do this. The second reason why I can't wait is, ever since I was born, not long after that Lan Macian left, people from the Lan clan came. And there were many of them, inside the palace and outside the palace," the little fellow said. "They can hide from my mother, but they can't hide from my spiritual perception. At present they are looking into every one of them, if they can be sure. As long as they are certain, they will make a move. You are undoubtedly their biggest target now. They must already be suspicious of you," the little fellow said. "In the lower three heavens, it will undoubtedly be difficult for you to do anything. If we are controlled, it will be even more difficult for you. Furthermore, they've been preparing for more than a year. You have no chance of winning at all if you're caught off guard. So, although I know that talking to you like this is shocking, I have no choice but to tell you in advance. If you die, and you die in the lower three heavens, my mother will really break down." The little fellow muttered, "I don't want my mother to break down." Chu Yang was exasperated. Just as he felt a little teachable and a kind of as expected of my son. He knows how to think for his father at such a young age, how filial. He was completely destroyed by this sentence. It turned out that this little rascal still didn't want his mother to be sad. But, the Lan clan. 2 rays of cold light shot out from Chu Yang's eyes. This Lan clan really didn't know what was good for them. They had actually set their sights on this place. Chu Yang was extremely smart. Once he heard this sentence, he completely understood everything. Lan Meixian was Tai Butian's teacher. She saw Heavy Pill at Tai Butian's place. And Lan Meixian was from the Lan clan. Facing the Tribulation Sword Master, the Lan clan was one of the first big clans to bear the brunt. How could they not have made preparations? Therefore, she had started to make preparations in advance. Tai Butian wouldn't say who he was, of course, and Chu Yang could understand that the Lan clan kept it a secret and wouldn't deal with Tai Butian's mother before things were clear. He reckoned that the Lan clan had the same idea as the Li clan, to become one of the tribulations and continue to be glorious for 10,000 years. No matter what, under this premise, they had to give way. Moreover, with the master-disciple relationship between Tai Butian and Lan Meixian, the Lan clan already had this initial condition. If they knew who the Tribulation Sword Master was, then with the Lan clan's means, there were thousands of ways to establish a relationship with him, and then logically become a tribulation. This was the Lan clan's wishful thinking. And at that time, the master-disciple relationship between Tai Butian and Lan Meixian would become an even more indestructible bond. Tai Butian didn't know, Chu Yang didn't know. Then, this plan was almost 100% successful. No matter from which aspect, there was no possibility of failure. It was just that the Lan clan never dreamed that their plan, which they thought was flawless, would actually fail in the hands of a little child who had just turned 1. "I know," said Chu Yang deeply. "Then I'm relieved," said the little fellow very happily. "Now you don't have anything else to do, right?" Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. "No." "What do you want to do?" asked the little fellow warily. "Just making a few changes to the agreement just now," Chu Yang said lightly. "First, naming is the matter of the parents. There has never been a child who named himself, so the name you gave is invalid. For the time being, you will still be called Tai Yang. In the future, after you acknowledge your ancestors and return to the clan, I will give you a name." "You're cheating." The little fellow was dumbfounded. He never thought that this old man of his would burn the bridge after crossing the river. "As for your nickname, from now on, you will be called Dan Dan," said Chu Yang. "This name is not bad." "No." The little fellow wanted to cry but had no tears. "You have to do it even if you can't." Chu Yang pursed his lips. "I'll tell my mother that I want to ruin all your plans." "I'll do what I say," the little fellow threatened fiercely. "I'm not afraid. If you're not afraid that your mother will be sad, you can even sell your father," Chu Yang said calmly. "It's rare for you to be so sensible. You know how to care for your mother at such a young age. Not bad, not bad. Let me tell you, you're not allowed to be disobedient in the future. If you're disobedient, I have ways to make your mother heartbroken." "You..." The little fellow was dumbfounded. Although he knew a lot, this was the first time in his life that he had reincarnated as a human. He was only a theoretical giant. In reality, he was still inexperienced. In a face-to-face confrontation with a wily old fox like Chu Yang, he was immediately defeated. "You don't keep your word." The little fellow's face twisted. "This is the first lesson I'm teaching you. As long as you're strong, you can go back on your word. Just like now, I can beat you up if you don't keep your word, but you can't do anything if I don't keep my word." Chu Yang laughed mischievously. "Son, you should learn a little. You bragged quite a lot just now, but bragging too much without any strength can only be a joke. Do you understand?" Chu Yang asked with his eyebrows raised. "I understand." The little fellow's pink face was a little twisted. "Wait for me to grow up." "You're moving, aren't you going to call me father?" Minister Chu raised his chin. "Son, you're still too inexperienced to fight with me." "Father!" He had to call him father sooner or later. What was the difference between calling him father earlier or later? Although it was a little embarrassing to be forced to call him father, this was his father. It didn't seem to be embarrassing. "Well, good Dan Dan." Chu Yang nodded approvingly. "Father, can I not call you Dan Dan?" The little fellow was completely soft. "This problem." Chu Yang smiled deeply and faced his son's fawning eyes. "No!" The little fellow lowered his head dejectedly. When your mother comes later, you know what to say, right? Chu Yang was very proud. I know. Good, since that's the case, I'm in high spirits now. I'll tell you a few stories to play with, Chu Yang said with a smile. At the same time, he filtered the stories in his heart. Yes, personal experiences that could be used as a reference for his son, and could be understood. After 4 or 5 stories in a row, the little fellow listened until he yawned. What's wrong? Is it not good? Minister Chu asked. Father, these... The little fellow was speechless and was a little mad. Tell stories. Why are you telling these? My experience with that sword is not as much as what you're telling me, right? He told a few more. The little fellow finally couldn't bear it anymore. He revealed a cute smile and climbed up with his 2 short little hands. He said innocently, Father, let me tell you a few stories. Chapter 1200. When Tai Butian returned from the court meeting, what she saw was the scene of a loving father and son. She saw Chu Yang carrying his son and walking to and fro in the imperial garden. The two of them seemed to be talking non-stop. It must be hard on him. Such a grown man actually chatting so happily with such a child. Tai Butian felt a surge of warmth in her heart and quickly walked over. She suddenly felt that something was wrong, because Chu Yang's voice was so low that it was almost inaudible from afar. He was actually asking non-stop. What happened after that? After that? When they saw Tai Butian return, both father and son shut up at the same time. What after that? Tai Butian asked doubtfully. After that. Ha ha. Chu Yang laughed dryly. Rubbing his nose, he said, I told the little fellow a story and deliberately left the ending untold so that he could guess it himself. In the end, he was too stupid and couldn't guess it. Tai Butian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You tested such a big child like that? She was rather speechless. Chu Yang coughed a few times and said, He started training from a young age. As the saying goes, education should start from a young age. The little thing in Chu Yang's arms turned his face away, unable to bear the sight. Tai Butian rolled her eyes at him and took the child from his arms. She flew into a rage at once. You didn't give him any water? Look at how dry his lips are. Chu Yang was sweating. He was so engrossed in listening to the story that he actually forgot about this. However, this journey to the West Story was indeed pleasant to listen to. At night, under the little fellow's strong request, he and Chu Yang stayed in the same room, leaving Tai Butian alone in the room. However, Tai Butian was still very happy. This father and son pair really bonded quickly. It had only been an afternoon, and they had already developed to such an inseparable state. Of course, the happiest thing was, Chu Yang had actually gained his son's approval so quickly. For 3 consecutive days, everything was calm and peaceful. In these 3 days, Chu Yang would sometimes coax the child. Sometimes he would go to the Golden Palace to listen to politics. The feeling in his heart also grew stronger by the day. In these few days, he discovered Tai Butian's good points. There were simply too many. In the past, when they were together, Tai Butian also had countless good points. But at that time he had, after all, observed her from a man's perspective and thoughts. But now that he was looking at her from a different angle, Chu Yang realized just how difficult it was for a woman to achieve what Tai Butian had achieved. Tai Butian was very open-minded. She would be able to find a solution to anything that could be solved on the same day. It definitely wouldn't be delayed until tomorrow. Even if there were some difficulties, he would still strive to overcome them. There were some issues that the officials couldn't come to an agreement on, but Tai Butian would make a decision on her own. Some were more complicated. He also ordered an investigation to be carried out within 1 day. Then it would be done. Rewards and punishments were clear. Rewards and punishments were given simultaneously. It cleverly took care of everyone. It made it so that the several small groups in the court could not be formed, nor could they be separated. They could only exist by relying on each other. In front of her son, she achieved unity even more. When Chu Yang was around, she was a loving mother. When Chu Yang was not around, she was the combination of a strict father and a loving mother. In front of Chu Yang, she was a woman who was deeply in love with Chu Yang. I love you, but I won't lose my independence because of my love for you. I am as gentle as water to you, but it doesn't mean that I won't survive without you. I am tolerant of you. I won't force you or force you. Everything is up to you. No matter what the outcome is, I will have no regrets. But in front of the officials, she was a ruler who dominated the world and dominated the world. She was indisputable and unquestionable. She had a pure heart and spirit, as well as courage and heroism. She could run the world and also handle her own feelings reasonably. She even dared to face her own heart directly. Cute, intelligent, independent, generous, open-minded, and upright. Not to mention her beautiful face, slim figure, elegant temperament, and sense of propriety. She was peerless and a national beauty. Such a woman should be the most ideal wife for any man in the world. There was no one like her. After interacting with her these few days, Chu Yang realized that he had fallen deeply in love with this cute woman. Her depression, her pain, her joy, her bliss, her satisfaction, her regrets, her achievements, all of them made Chu Yang's heart throb incessantly. With Tai Butian's sharp mind and intelligence, she could naturally sense the changes in Chu Yang's mood and emotions these few days. Therefore, the Emperor's mood had been very good and joyful these few days. Even when sitting in the majestic hall, the Emperor's joy could not be concealed. That was a feeling of bliss. When the long-awaited love slowly approached again, no matter who it was, they would not act as if nothing had happened. In these few days, those people from the Lan clan who were in hiding did not appear, nor did they take any action. But Chu Yang knew that they were in the dark, using various methods to observe him. After all, these people might not have seen him before, and they might not know that he was Chu Yang. His sudden appearance in the imperial palace could only be said to be an accident. He was the biggest suspect. But they didn't dare to act rashly without concrete evidence. After more than a year of planning, if they alerted the enemy because of this and caused Tai Butian's strong disgust, then even if the Tribulation Sword Master really came in the future, they would lose some kind of hope. Pillow talk was the most powerful thing in the world. Especially pillow talk of Tai Butian's level, it could dominate the world. So they were waiting for an opportunity. Chu Yang was also waiting for an opportunity. After sleeping with their son for a few nights, both father and son felt extremely miserable. The younger one felt that the flesh on his father's body was too hard and there was no warmth at all. Sleeping in his father's arms was much more comfortable than sleeping on his own. The older one felt that this little guy was too delicate and did not dare to turn over while sleeping with him in his arms, fearing that he would crush him if he turned over. Such a delicate little thing would definitely not be able to withstand his weight of more than 50 kilograms. In particular, some folklore said that some children were accidentally crushed to death by their parents not long after they were born, or choked to death while drinking milk, suffocated to death, and so on. Such things are definitely not bragging. At least such things have happened here before. Chu Yang did not dare to move even more. Sleeping like this for a whole night really made all the bones in his body creak. It was even more tiring than a big battle. This night Tai Butian was leaning against the lamp and reading memorials in her pajamas. She suddenly looked deep in thought. She frowned and thought. Then, she raised her eyebrows and quickly gave instructions. Then, she changed to the next one. Chu Yang saw that Tai Butian had nothing to worry about. She could save time to deal with official matters. It was already late at night, and she was about to finish dealing with them. Tai Butian's lips curled into a smile. Even though it was late at night. Even now, Tai Butian had not taken off that piece of jade. She still looked like a handsome young emperor who was diligently dealing with official matters. Right at this moment, she suddenly heard a knock on the door. "What's the matter?" Tai Butian asked authoritatively. "Your Majesty, your humble servant Chu Yang requests an audience." A strange voice came from outside. Tai Butian was stunned. "Chu Yang? Why did he come over at such a time? Wasn't he accompanying her? Could it be? At the thought of this, she hurried forward to open the door. Only to see Chu Yang standing alone at the door, she couldn't help but be startled. What's the matter? That little guy chased me out. Chu Yang rubbed his nose and smiled bitterly. I have nowhere to sleep. But Ian was stunned. A long time ago, the little guy had been making a fuss about wanting a room to himself. But Ian had never agreed. How could such a young child have a room to himself? She was worried. But Minister Chu was directly chased out this time. This was still somewhat out of her expectations. I'll go over and take a look. But Ian walked out. Not long after, but Ian shook her head helplessly and came back. As expected. He said that he doesn't feel comfortable sleeping with someone beside him. Then let's give it a try, Chu Yang suggested. Let's try letting him sleep alone. But Ian frowned for a long time before she finally said, All right. But I'll have to go over and take a look at him a few times in the middle of the night. As she spoke, she sat down. What is your Majesty busy with? Chu Yang leaned forward with a drooling face. Tian's face suddenly turned red. Only now did she realize that there was such a big problem in her room. Late at night. A lonely lamp. A man and a woman alone. Alone in a room. This was a little inappropriate. You can go to the guard room and make do for the night. But Ian suppressed her panic and said in a calm voice, Why don't you go to the imperial study and make do for the night? Chu Yang chuckled. No need. I'm also worried about your Majesty being alone. Tonight I'll just wait on you and serve you. Chu Yang's voice was very tactful when he said the words serve, serve. In fact, he had repeated them several times. No way! Tian's face flushed red as she rejected him decisively. But Chu Yang had already leaned forward. He reached out and grabbed her hand. But your Majesty said that as long as I change my mind, I can do whatever I want. I didn't say that. Ian glared. But I've already said it. Chu Yang had already pulled the Emperor into his arms. Tian's entire body suddenly trembled. It turned out that Chu Yang's hand had already caressed her neck and gently plucked that piece of unfathomable illusion jade off her neck. Instantly, the valiant and heroic young Emperor turned into a peerless beauty of unparalleled beauty. Chu Yang's eyes stared at her face without blinking. After a long time, he murmured, So beautiful. Ian bit her lip and said, You. Don't be too presumptuous. Why aren't you leaving? Chu Yang had already moved closer to her ear and blew a breath of hot air mischievously. He said softly, Little Tian. I realize that I've fallen for you. Tian's delicate body trembled. In that instant, even her ears turned as red as agate. It may be a little fast, but I believe that you can feel it. Chu Yang leaned close to her small earlobe and exhaled gently. That warm breath made Tian's entire body go limp and numb. She heard Chu Yang say, Because we have a very, very deep foundation. What foundation? Tian lowered her head and asked weakly. The foundation is here. Chu Yang raised his head. Look up. Here? Tian was perplexed. She couldn't help but raise her head to take a look. However, the moment she did, she instantly realized that a shadow had appeared in front of her. A handsome face had bent down, and a domineering mouth had covered her lips. Chapter 12:01. The night was as dark as ink. The lonely lamp was as small as a bean. In the bedroom, a man and a woman hugged each other gently. Ian had been cultivating the icy heart jade bones since she was young. Ever since she gave birth and took the heavenly elixir, she had reached the true icy heart jade bone level. Her heart was exquisite and clear, and she could see through everything. Especially when other people's attitudes toward her were hiding something, or when their emotions were truly fluctuating, Ian could sense them clearly. In these few days, Chu Yang had kept a distance from her. Although he would occasionally joke around, it was harmless and he would basically change the topic. Tai Butian was well aware that Chu Yang was looking at her from different angles. Whether it was the way she conducted herself, or any other aspect. Chu Yang was looking at her. But even so, Tai Butian's pride was aroused. I know that you want to find a reason to like me because of your son. But do I have to make you like me? Therefore, Tai Butian didn't give a very positive response to this matter. She just faced it very normally and did what she usually did very normally. She didn't slack off, but she didn't deliberately show it either. If there was anything unusual, it would be that she deliberately showed some temper. However, Chu Yang's gaze was becoming gentler day by day. Although Tai Butian was happy that she was slowly conquering her lover, she also felt a little uncomfortable. She kept feeling as if she was a commodity waiting to be judged on her appearance and everything else. Now, when Chu Yang pushed the door open and entered, Tai Butian had already guessed his intentions. But she kept feeling that it was a little too fast. But she didn't expect that this bastard would hug her after just saying a few words, deceiving her to raise her head, and those domineering lips pressed down on hers. At this moment, her emotions were in complete chaos. Tai Butian's starry eyes were tightly shut. She leaned against Chu Yang's chest. She was half forced to raise her head slightly. Her tender red lips were being ravaged by the man in front of her. Her nose fluttered lightly. Her face was flushed red. Chu Yang's hands, which were gently wrapped around her waist, slowly began to exert force and gradually moved downwards. No! No! Tai Butian tilted her head fiercely. She avoided Chu Yang's hot lips, only feeling weak all over and almost falling. She supported herself on Chu Yang's chest with her hands and shook her head vigorously. No! It's too fast! Chu Yang didn't force her. He just hugged her slender waist and said, "What's so fast about it?" Tai Butian shook her head frantically. I'm a little scared." Chu Yang smiled. "Am I very scary? I'm not going to eat you." Tai Butian only shook her head. His bright eyes looked into Tai Butian's eyes. His movements were very slow but very resolute. It was clear that he was giving her time to react. "Consider whether you want to accept me or not." As Chu Yang leaned forward, Tai Butian's body slowly leaned back to dodge. She leaned back with all her might. It was almost parallel to the ground. Her long hair cascaded down like a waterfall. The ends of her hair actually reached the ground. There was no way to retreat any further. Right now, Tai Butian's 2 feet were on the ground, her waist bent backward as if it had been broken. If she retreated any further, she would fall to the ground. His lips were less than an inch away from Tai Butian's petal-like lips. The distance between their eyes was less than 2 inches. He asked softly, "Is that okay?" Tai Butian bit her lip and shook her head. Chu Yang asked again. Tai Butian closed her eyes and shook her head. But just as she closed her eyes, she felt her cherry lips being captured again. That bone-piercing taste that she had experienced before once again assaulted her. She couldn't help but feel her head explode again. She only felt the tip of a nimble tongue prying open her red lips. After a long time, the Emperor's chest heaved up and down. Her breathing was rapid and her face was flushed. Chu Yang raised his head. Maintaining his original distance, he asked softly, "Is that okay?" Tai Butian turned her head away in embarrassment. What kind of question was this? "You're asking if it's okay?" If she didn't agree, you kissed her fiercely and then asked if it's okay? If she didn't agree, you kissed her fiercely again. And now you're asking if it's okay? What can I do if it's okay? She only felt the warmth on her lips. This guy was actually pressing his lips against hers again. After a long time, she heard Chu Yang ask again softly, "Is that okay?" There was no room for resistance in the face of power. Looks like this guy is bent on making me give an answer. Tai Butian had no choice. She closed her eyes and nodded while her heart was beating like a drum. "That's great." Chu Yang opened his mouth and kissed her again. This time, the kiss lasted even longer. The Emperor was head over heels, as if she was in the clouds. But she felt extremely strange. You asked if it's okay? When I didn't agree, you kissed me. Now that I've nodded, you're still kissing me. What's going on? After a long time, their lips parted. Tai Batian panted heavily. She finally struggled to stand up straight and asked, "What did you ask just now?" Chu Yang was stunned. "What did you think I asked you?" Tai Butian's face was flushed red. She pinched him fiercely. "Say it," Chu Yang said. "I asked you just now if you felt okay when I kissed you." Suddenly he smacked his lips and said, "Did you think I asked you if it's okay?" Tai Batian was so embarrassed that she couldn't speak. "I thought you asked me." No wonder this guy continued to kiss me the moment I shook my head. He thought I didn't feel okay. That's not right. But I've already nodded. Why did you still kiss me? Tai Batian was puzzled. That's right. When you nodded, it meant that you felt okay. How can you not try harder? This time, I asked you to continue. Is it okay? There was a mischievous smile on Chu Yang's face. Tai Butian's face was flushed red. She instantly knew that this guy was purely playing rogue. There was no question of whether it was okay or not. It was true that he was teaching her a lesson. Chu Yang, let me ask you. You've only looked at me for 3 days. Don't you think this is a little too fast? Tai Butian asked in a low voice. I just think it's too slow, Chu Yang said regretfully. How much time have I wasted? Tai Batian turned her head and then turned back. She looked deeply into Chu Yang's eyes and said softly, Chu Yang, if there were no children, would you be so fast? Chu Yang stared into her eyes and said, What if we had never met? What if we had 17 or 18 children? Tian, no matter what, it didn't happen. It can't be considered. You're such an intelligent girl. Why would you ask such a stupid question? You might as well say that if you were a man. Chu Yang let out a strange laugh. Tai Butian's face was flushed red, but she said gently, It's my fault. I'm a little petty. Chu Yang looked deeply at her. He smiled and helped her up. Then, he helped her to sit down. Tai Batian didn't know what he was going to do. She looked at him blankly. With a flip of his hands, a red candle appeared in Chu Yang's hands. Together with the candlestick, they were arranged neatly. He blew out the light in front of Tai Batian. As the candles lit up, Tai Batian suddenly realized that her room had actually turned into a hazy red color. A thick red carpet had also been laid out on the floor, just like the bridal chamber of newlyweds. Chu Yang had already placed 2 cups of wine on the table. He unfolded a piece of red cloth and said, Tian, I'm afraid you won't be able to leave for the time being. But I'm not going to let you off. So, I'll have to trouble you a little. Tonight, it'll be our bridal chamber night. Tai Butian's face was flushed red. She said angrily, I didn't agree to marry you. What bridal chamber night? But her heart was warm. He was understanding of my difficulties after all and didn't force me. Just this sentence of you won't be able to leave for the time being was enough to show how far Chu Yang had thought for her from her position. Chu Yang ignored her and said, Tonight you're my bride. As he spoke, he took a step forward and covered her head with the red veil. I'm sorry to trouble you. Chu Yang was a little apologetic. The wedding of an emperor is so simple. But when you're done with the state affairs, we'll hold another wedding for you in the upper 3 heavens. Tai Batian felt both joy and frustration. She wanted to pull down the red veil, but after thinking about it, she didn't. She only felt her hand being held by Chu Yang. She slowly lowered herself to the ground and cowed out 3 times. She only thought in her heart, Am I marrying myself off just like that? Then, there was a light in front of her. The red veil was lifted by Chu Yang. A smiling and handsome face was looking at her lovingly. He called out softly, Mother! Tai Batian lowered her head, not daring to make a sound. Then, she felt a chill in her hand. A cup of wine was stuffed into her hand. Then, she saw Chu Yang's arm around her. He said, Mother, it's time for us to cross cups. Tai Batian felt like she was a puppet. She had become a bride in a daze, went through the wedding ceremony in a daze, drank wine in a daze, and turned herself into a certain someone's mother in a daze. Everything was under the command of this groom. There was actually such a wedding in the world. There was only the bride and groom. There wasn't even a single spectator. When the ceremony was over, but Ian still felt like she was in a daze. Her face was flushed and her eyes were watery. She was still thinking in her heart, but Ian, I'm getting married just like that. What she couldn't deny was that the confusion and fear in her heart were far less than the happiness and nervousness. It was as if a huge rock in her heart had been lifted with a thud. From today onwards but Ian, am also a woman with a husband, and a woman with someone to rely on. Silently, she heaved a long sigh of relief. It was as if all the pressure she had been under since she was born had vanished into thin air at this moment. Mother! Chu Yang took her hand and held her in his embrace. His two eyes looked at her deeply. Chu Yang, you! Butian's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Wrong. You should call me husband. Chu Yang put on a fierce face. Butian opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. She laughed shyly. What are you laughing at? You're already disrespectful to your husband on your wedding night. See how I'll punish you! Chu Yang pretended to be angry. He slapped hard on the perky bottom of the beauty in his arms. Butian cried out in pain, only to realize that her body was in midair. This foe had already picked her up and was walking step by step toward the big bed. Butian's beautiful eyes were deep. She didn't struggle. She just looked at the face of the man who had just become her husband in a daze. There was a faint blissful smile on her lips. Her body was gently placed on the bed. She had just felt the warmth of the blanket when her vision darkened. Chu Yang was already on top of her. Butian wanted to say something, but she couldn't say anything. Her mouth had already been sealed tightly. Her hands had just moved a little when they were restrained. Her legs had just moved a little when they were also pinned down. It was a complete suppression. Then, a soft sound came from her chest. That was one of her buttons being undone. The next chapter was a little later. It wasn't to whet everyone's appetite. It was just that this pushover scene was really the most troublesome thing for writers. It was too difficult to control the limits. Once they went overboard and were reported, they would be in big trouble. Especially now that they were in the midst of a crackdown, they had to be even more cautious. But but when my temper flares up, I just don't want to let it go. So for today's plot, I even specially argued with the editor several times last night and this morning. So I have to be very careful about what I write next. All along, we've been a big target of reports. Back then, a fantasy book was reported hundreds of times. Because it created a record of being reported. That was the evil monarch from another world that I wrote. Damn it! The second chapter will be late. Everyone, please understand. Chapter 1202. But Ian looked at Chu Yang and felt her outer robe being undone. She became more and more shy, but surprisingly, she didn't move at all. She just looked at Chu Yang tenderly, at her man. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was as if she had already said 1,000 words. She wanted to give her best side to her lover. It was just that simple, and only that simple. Butian's position in herself had always been very accurate. In front of the court officials, she was the emperor of a generation. No one could question the majesty of an emperor, and no one dared to offend her. If anyone did, they would be struck down like lightning. In front of her son, she was a mother. No status or position could affect her heart as a mother. In front of Chu Yang, she was a wife, a woman. A woman whose heart belonged to someone else. Talk about the status of an emperor, or being below tens of thousands of people, none of these were necessary. But Ian also knew that her status as an emperor might be high and mighty to ordinary people. But to Chu Yang, it really wasn't much. However, even if Chu Yang didn't care, but Ian wasn't willing to show any power or authority in front of the man she loved deeply. But Ian had always believed in one sentence: Life was too short. These 4 short words were actually all-encompassing. Any meaning was summarized in these words. But now that she was so cooperative, Chu Yang felt that something was wrong. He pressed on top of her and asked, "Why are you so quiet? You're so obedient. It makes me feel a little embarrassed." Tai Batian hugged Chu Yang's head, her eyes sparkling like spring water. Suddenly, she looked up and kissed Chu Yang on the cheek. She said gently, "Since we've already gone through the wedding ceremony, then Chu Yang is Tian Tian's husband. Since Tian Tian has a husband, her husband is her everything. Then, of course I have to listen to my husband. If my husband wants little Tian Tian, how would little Tian Tian dare to disobey my husband?" Chu Yang pursed his lips and chuckled. "You're the one who said that. You'll listen to everything I say, okay?" Tai Butian's beautiful hair spread out like dark clouds on the pillow. Her swan-like beautiful neck raised slightly, and she bravely looked up to meet Chu Yang's gaze. She murmured, "Chu Yang, husband." Although the voice was low, Chu Yang could clearly hear it. The woman beneath him had a kind of wholeheartedly giving, relying on, loving, and relying on him wholeheartedly. This murmur was like a bugle call to charge. Chu Yang's blood was boiling. He lowered his head abruptly, and the lips on all 4 sides came together. Tai Batian shuddered all over. She could only feel a pair of hands that were like slithering snakes. Suddenly, his hand reached under her clothes. When his palm came into contact with her delicate skin, she couldn't help but tremble. His hands slowly moved forward, as if he was feeling something. It was as if he was a brave explorer who was advancing towards the peak. She pursed her lips tightly, resisting the strange throbbing in her heart that she had never felt before. She gritted her teeth. When they finally reached the highest point, Tai Batian couldn't help but let out a moan. Her flower-like toes suddenly straightened. Chu Yang went all the way down. She felt the clothes on her body slowly being removed. Slowly, her wonderful body was already exposed to Chu Yang's gaze. Tai Batian closed her eyes tightly. No matter what Chu Yang said, she refused to open them. She was like a pile of fragrant mud that he could do whatever he wanted with her, but her heart. Suddenly, a kind of fear rose in her heart. She suddenly recalled the time when she cured Chu Yang's poison in the mountains of Beyond the Heavens sect. At that time, it was as if she was going to be torn apart. She really didn't have the courage to endure that kind of intense pain. She had to endure it again. A long time had passed since the incident. The moment she thought about it, she felt so embarrassed that she wanted to die. Plus, there was still lingering fear in her heart. This time, it wouldn't be as painful as before, right? Logically speaking, in the palace, no matter if it was the emperor or the princess, after reaching a certain age, they would all have a special nanny. It was also a rule in the palace to teach them some things about human relations. No matter which plane it was, there was no doubt that such a rule existed. But although Tai Batian was a girl, she had been raised as a son since she was young. The old people from back then had all been executed. As Tai Batian's authority grew day by day, who would dare to tell her these things? Besides, Tai Batian was already the master of the entire Iron Cloud nation back then. When the world was at peace, Tai Batian had already swiftly gotten married and even had a child. Who would be so blind as to explain these matters between men and women to an emperor who already had children? Wouldn't that be courting death? If they didn't understand, where did the child come from? So until now, Tai Batian was still in a daze. She only had a rough idea. As for the specific feelings, she didn't know anything at all. The only memory she had was that time when she cured Chu Yang's poison. It was so painful that she almost died. She felt a chill on her body and the last of her undergarments left her body. Rustling sounds could be heard. It should be Chu Yang taking off his clothes. One had to admit that the speed at which Minister Chu took off his clothes was extremely fast. With a swoosh, it was clean and smooth. Then, he pounced on her. At such a critical moment, Tai Batian recalled the excruciating pain that made her wish she was dead. She suddenly bent her legs and curled up like a big prawn. "Io!" Minister Chu was full of desire as he pounced on her. He had intended to embrace her in his arms, and in the next moment. Who would have thought that at this critical moment, the beauty beneath him who had allowed him to do whatever he pleased would suddenly change her position? With a thud, 2 knees hit her lower abdomen. She was stunned at once. "What's wrong?" Chu Jiang felt like his whole body was about to explode. How could he stop at such a critical moment? I'm scared. Tai Batian covered her face pitifully. At this moment, she didn't have the demeanor of a queen descending to the world. "What are you scared of?" Chu Jiang was very puzzled. "Pain," Tai Batian muttered softly. "Pain?" Chu Yang fainted. Tai Batian buried her head in the pillow and said like a mosquito, "The last time, the antidote, it hurt so much." Realization dawned on Chu Yang. He said seductively, "I promise, it won't hurt at all this time." "I don't believe you." She buried her head in the pillow and shook it vigorously. "Try it and you'll believe me." He continued to seduce her. "I'm scared, come, don't." Tai Batian curled up her body with all her might, like a quail that had curled up into a ball. Chu Yang was at loggerheads, but there was nothing he could do for a moment. In the end, he finally couldn't take it any more. He leaped up, no longer caring about the order of things. He directly moved his hands up and down, forcefully flipping this graceful body over. He opened his mouth and covered her red lips tightly, preventing any sound of protest from coming out of Tai Butian's mouth. This didn't seem like a tender and sweet bridal room, but more like a real overlord forcing himself on her. Both of them were gasping for breath. Only when he really couldn't take it any more did Chu Yang release his mouth. After pausing for a while, he sealed her lips again. But Ian only felt that her body was slowly heating up as that pair of strange hands wandered around everywhere. A strange feeling slowly rose up. Slowly, her tense body started to relax without her noticing. After a long time, but Ian let out a muffled groan, 3,000,000 words omitted here, cough. "If I continue writing, I'll have to go to work for the government." The taste of this night was really indescribable, until a long, long time later, when Tai Butian's best friend, Wu Qianqian, asked about the taste of today. But Ian was still so embarrassed that she wanted to crawl into a hole to hide her face. Because she didn't know anything, she naturally thought that whatever Chu Yang said should be absolutely correct, and she just had to do as he said. Therefore, Minister Chu had exerted himself to the limit that night. Minister Chu enjoyed all kinds of strange and unacceptable things, one after another. Before they reached, Her Majesty had already begged for mercy. But after that, she realized that the other party was even more aggressive, and from this night onwards, as long as the two of them were together, tonight's events would repeat. Repeat and repeat, all the way until many, many years later. All the way until many years later. When she was with her sisters, and they were all familiar with each other, they talked about those embarrassing things. It was only then that but Ian knew that all those methods and techniques that this damned bastard had used on her all these years were actually very unbearable and unbearable, in short, very taboo. One time, after drinking wine, Wu Qianqian and the others asked about it. The ladies laughed at her for a long time, causing Sword Master Chu to be disliked by the embarrassed Her Majesty for a long time. But at that time, many years had already passed since then. One night passed. The night was short, and the sun rose high. From then on, the Emperor didn't attend morning court. The officials who were waiting for morning court had already waited for a long time, but Her Majesty still didn't appear. Everyone was discussing animatedly. Her Majesty had always been diligent in her work. Such a situation had never happened before since she ascended the throne. There was even one time when she had a high fever and forced herself to attend morning court, but she was still persuaded to go back by the officials. But today was really strange. Her Majesty actually didn't even greet her. The sun had already risen, but Her Majesty didn't move at all. Thus, all the officials begged Lord Feng, the head steward of the Imperial Palace, to go and ask. As everyone knew, Her Majesty's bedroom was strictly forbidden from outsiders. The security was so tight that it was beyond any other emperor. Not to mention the palace maids, Even the guards were all women. Even the eunuchs were not allowed to take a step into the bedroom. With regards to this request, Minister Feng Qiliang also felt awkward. He stood outside the bedroom and asked a palace maid to go and ask while he waited. After a long time, the palace maid came out and said, "Morning court is adjourned today." When the news came back, everyone was relieved. Although they were still a little puzzled, there was an explanation after all, so they dispersed in twos and threes. In the bedroom, Chu Yang was lying down comfortably, hugging a soft and white jade-like body. His face was full of comfort. "I said it doesn't hurt, right?" someone said proudly. Her voice was like a cat's. "Go to sleep, it's not early anymore." He didn't rest for the whole night. "Not early anymore? I have to go to morning court, oh no." Tai Butian hurriedly sat up, but the moment her body moved, she immediately fell back down with a groan. Only then did she realize that she had no strength at all, as if all the bones in her body had been pulled out. "I've already rejected the morning court for you." "Just when we were doing that, you didn't hear it. Didn't you notice that I covered your mouth at that time?" Someone laughed evilly. "You, damn it!" Chapter 1203. This night, Chu Yang was simply like a dream or a fantasy. Even until now, he still felt like he was dreaming. He really didn't expect that Tai Butian, as the empress of a generation, would actually be completely clueless about what happened under the bed. She hadn't even heard of it before. Therefore, this night was completely led by Chu Yang. No matter what Chu Yang said, she only needed to say, "Isn't this how it is between husband and wife?" This was very normal, so Tai Butian did as she was told. And she was even afraid that she didn't do a good job and couldn't serve him as well as other women served their husbands. She was still very nervous and asked Chu Yang shyly, "Can I?" Chu Yang had an extremely comfortable night, and it was also extremely satisfying. But now that the passion had subsided, Tai Butian fell into a deep sleep. Looking at the beautiful woman in his arms, Chu Yang's heart suddenly became heavy. Tai Butian didn't understand, and Chu Yang found it strange. But when he thought carefully about Tai Butian's background, he completely understood. This empress of a generation who dominated the world, an unparalleled beauty, behind that limitless glory, was an extremely tragic background and a pressure that was as heavy as heaven and earth. She, although limitless glory, she was really very pitiful. Because of politics, she lost her mother, sister, and all her relatives. Because of war, she lost her father. Because of the kingdom's politics, she had no friends. Because of the pressure, she had no childhood. And now, because of him, she first gave herself and then hid her love. She even became a single mother. If it were any other woman, even if she was mentally strong, she would probably have broken down long ago. But Tai Butian bore it all alone, all the way until now. Chu Yang looked at the woman sleeping peacefully in his arms. That completely relaxed and unreserved expression of trust made his heart ache. In this life, ever since he became the empress, how many days of bliss had she had? Even during that period of time when she had feelings for him and developed feelings for him, she probably didn't feel much sweetness. Because at that time, he still didn't know that she was a woman. Naturally, he also didn't know that there was a young girl's heart beating for him. Or maybe there was. At the moment when the child was in his arms. Or maybe now, after he came here. After everything was revealed, when she felt that his heart was open to her. Unfortunately, even if there was, it was also so little and so short. What could he give her? Chu Yang sighed lightly. He pulled Tai Butian's delicate body into his arms again and lowered his head. Looking at this peaceful and blissful face, he couldn't help but lower his head and kiss the tip of that perky nose again. Tai Butian murmured and moved a little in his arms. Her rosy lips moved a little, but she didn't open her eyes. She merely shifted into a more comfortable position. She continued to sleep soundly on his shoulder. Tai Butian slept all the way until noon. In all these years, There had never been a night where he could sleep as comfortably and relaxed as tonight. He didn't even have a single dream the entire night. When he woke up, he blinked his sleepy eyes, and was about to get up when he suddenly realized that he was still naked. Tai Butian was completely naked. She couldn't help but feel embarrassed as she recalled the events of last night. Tai Butian's starry eyes flickered as she bit her lip in embarrassment. She spat lightly. Seeing that Chu Yang had fallen asleep right beside her, Tai Butian's heart was suddenly filled with boundless happiness and satisfaction. This bastard. Truly fierce. Last night, he made her throw away her armor. She couldn't help but feel like biting Chu Yang when she recalled all those strange positions and methods that Chu Yang had suggested. But when she lowered her head, it turned into a light kiss. I, Tai Butian, can be considered a complete and happy woman from today onwards. Looking at the red candles on the table and the red carpet on the floor, Tai Butian's gaze became blurry. For the first time in more than 10 years, this was the first time she had such thoughts of the bed as so comfortable. I don't want to get out of bed. She felt extremely sluggish and couldn't help but want to lie down again. Right at this moment, she saw Chu Yang's tightly shut eyes move, as if he was about to wake up. Tai Butian hurriedly put her head back to its original position and closed her eyes. This fellow had indeed woken up. Actually, he had already woken up when Tai Butian woke up. But he just pretended not to open his eyes. Opening his eyes, Chu Yang muttered to himself, "This pretty girl hasn't woken up yet. What a little pig." Tai Butian closed her eyes and scolded in her heart, "You're the pig." But she felt a chill on her body. Someone had lifted the blanket and was looking at her body wantonly. Tai Butian didn't dare to open her eyes anymore. "What a pretty little pig," someone muttered to himself. Tai Butian felt a pair of hands roaming around her body again. This pair of hands seemed to have magical powers. Wherever they went, there would be a scorching heat. Although her eyes were still closed, her face was already flushing uncontrollably. "She hasn't woken up yet. That's good, I'll secretly do it first," someone muttered to himself. The next moment, Tai Butian felt someone gently climb up her body again, and then, "You! What are you doing?" The Emperor opened her eyes hurriedly, somewhat flustered. Her body was still limp from last night. Why was he doing it again? Chu Yang was already on top of her body. With a lewd smile, he said, "Your Majesty, I'm here to serve you." Outside the Forbidden City, in Prime Minister Wang's house, Her Majesty has adjourned the morning court. The senile Prime Minister Wang sat on the old-fashioned wooden armchair. His cloudy eyes stared blankly at his feet as he muttered these words to himself. Opposite him were 4 men in blue. One of them chuckled and said, "She didn't attend the morning court? Hee hee. Old man Wang, you're not telling the truth. Don't forget, your whole family's bloodline is in my hands. I know this. You don't have to remind me again and again." Prime Minister Wang panted tiredly and said angrily, "I've already told you all about the important matters of the court. I didn't hide anything." The man in blue snorted and clapped his hands. Another man in blue walked in. The new one was the new butler of Prime Minister Wang's residence, Wang. "How's the palace?" The man in blue narrowed his small eyes into a line. "There are 4 people in the palace. We suddenly lost contact with 3 of them. Now, only 7th Madam is here," Wang said respectfully. "Of the 3, one of them suddenly disappeared in the afternoon the day before yesterday. The other 2 were nowhere to be seen for the whole day yesterday. 7th Madam found out about this situation and immediately informed me. Until now, there's still no news. It seems, if I'm not wrong, they should have been killed." "Hee hee. Not bad, not bad. You're really good." The leading white-haired man in blue laughed softly. "You're indeed the sword master. This move is really good. Really neat." Another man in blue said, 3 martial monarchs are gone without anyone noticing?" Everyone's complexion became heavy. They looked at each other. Then, the white-haired blue-robed man said, "If they're gone, then they're gone. Compared to our grand plan, the death of 3 martial monarchs is nothing." Moreover, it's worth it since we've probed the real situation. So, it's true this time. The others nodded solemnly. How's Lanroa now? The white-haired old man suddenly raised his head and asked. Duke Lanroa is now living in the old site of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, the man in blue said. The Grand Duke has already made preparations. He's prepared to befriend this person at all costs. Yes, quickly informed the Grand Duke. At the old site of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, a blue-clothed young man with delicate features, a tall stature, and a tranquil and confident expression was walking out. If the people of the big clans of the upper three heavens were to see him, they would certainly be shocked. This young man was the first-in-line successor of the Lan clan, one of the big clans of the upper three heavens. The number one genius of the younger generation of the Lan clan, Grand Duke Lanroa. Lanroa, 28 years old. He could be said to be a dazzling new star in the Lan clan. Even among the younger generation of the big clans, he was one of the best. Among the younger generation of the big clans, he was ranked third. Lanroa, at the age of 3, completed the Martial Artist Foundation establishment. At the age of 5, he killed people with a sword. At the age of 7, he reached the Martial Grandmaster level. At the age of 11, he reached the Martial Revered level. At the age of 14, he reached the Martial King level. At the age of 10, he reached the Martial Monarch level. At the age of 24, he was already a Martial Saint. Although this was due to the huge amount of resources from the Lan clan, his own talent and aptitude were also outstanding. At the age of 24, he became a Martial Saint and was ranked third in the land of the Grand Dukes. At the age of 28, he was already an 8th-grade Martial Saint. According to Lanroa's own estimation, the amount of heavenly treasures he had consumed since he was young could fill up 3 rooms. The number one expert of the younger generation of the Lan clan, the wisest, the most talented, and the number one cultivation maniac. For such a young descendant, the Lan clan would naturally provide all the best resources without any regard for their own lives. Furthermore, they would always carry out the most important missions. Just like this time, when Lan Macian accidentally discovered the divine dragon footprints of the Tribulation Sword Master, the Lan clan sent this number one expert of the younger generation to carry out this mission. If there was only one person in the Lan clan who was qualified to become friends with the Tribulation Sword Master and become one of the Tribulations, then this person would undoubtedly be Lanroa. The Lan clan was working on 2 fronts. Firstly, they would be on alert in the upper 3 heavens and wait for news from the lower 3 heavens. If Lanroa could pass on good news, then the Lan clan would get in touch with the Li clan immediately. The 2 clans would join forces and break off relations with the other 7 big clans. For 10,000 years of glory, the Li clan could disregard everything. The Lan clan was also willing to take the risk. When Lanroa walked out of the room, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. This place is not bad, it is really not bad. There are mountains and rivers, and the environment is elegant. That king of Hell Chu has good taste. I heard that this place was built by that Gu Duxing from the Gu clan of the upper 3 heavens. Not bad, it's really a good place. Chapter 1204. He agreed to come so easily? Lanroa looked at the blue-robed man in front of him, somewhat surprised. For the Lan clan to lie in ambush here and wait for the heir to appear before inviting them in person was undoubtedly the last resort, since they had no way of contacting the upper 3 heavens. However, Lanroa himself also admitted that there were other ways to ease the tension in this matter. For example, sending a message, sending a letter secretly by flying sword, or sending an invitation. These were all methods commonly used by people in the martial world or ordinary people. As for inviting him face to face, it was equivalent to directly telling the other party, "We know you are here, and we also know who you are. Therefore, you must fly here." It was more or less like forcing yourself on him and threatening him. Also, it was a show of force. Lanroa knew himself very well. He was just a little uncomfortable about the matter between Chu Yang and Tai Bukian, so he wanted to suppress Chu Yang a little. But when it came to jealousy, it was far from that. Lan Rua had always been proud and arrogant. When he made the decision, he knew that such an invitation might leave a bad impression on the other party, which might not be beneficial to his plan. But even though he knew, he still didn't change his mind. Because he was confident. The heavens are sealed, of course we can't go up. But you, Chu Yang, are the same as us. We are all in the lower three heavens. You can't fly anywhere either. And on my side, there are several supreme martial artists and martial saints here. No matter how powerful you are, I can always suppress you. And in a place like the lower three heavens, if such an expert wants to find someone, there is really nowhere to hide. So Chu Yang, you can't run away either. Of course, the Lan clan's first priority was to befriend the Tribulation Sword Master. Because by befriending the Tribulation Sword Master, the Lan clan could continue to enjoy 10,000 years of glory. There were two ways to solve the Lan clan's crisis. The first was to kill the Tribulation Sword Master. The second was to befriend him. But was it better to kill or to befriend him? That was a question that even a fool could answer. If you befriend this person, your clan could enjoy 10,000 years of glory. If you killed him, you could only protect the riches in front of you. Then, was it better to kill or to befriend him? As long as he wasn't a pig. There was no such question. Since they knew who the Tribulation Sword Master was, of course they had to befriend him. And they had to be careful not to act rashly. If the other party really didn't know what to do, it wouldn't be too late to kill him then. But before that, not to mention killing, he had to be careful with his words. Even if there was only the slightest chance of befriending him, he would still have to put in 100,000 points of effort. The greatest power of the Calamity Sword Master was that before his wings were fully developed, he was extremely mysterious. No one knew who he was. Now that he knew how to do it, was it up to him? Therefore, Lan Ruoxin was also very certain. Therefore, this impolite invitation was sent out just like that. In his mind, after Chu Yang received such an invitation, Chu Yang would definitely not be able to do anything. He would definitely be fearful, panicked, and furious. He had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but this was the only one he hadn't thought of. The other party accepted it very calmly. Furthermore, he even specifically instructed that this banquet could not be too shabby. This made Lan Ruo feel as if he had punched a pile of cotton. All right, let me see what kind of person this Calamity Sword Master is. Lan Ruo put his hands behind his back and stood at the edge of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, facing the lake. He muttered to himself in a low voice. Suddenly, he felt a sense of exhilaration as if he had met his match. On the other side, Chu Yang was also thinking, this Duke Lan is obviously threatening me. Haha, just as well. If you didn't come looking for me, I would have gone looking for you. Anyway, my relationship with the Lan clan is already so bad that it can't be salvaged. It's rare that there's a guy like you who's secluded in the lower three heavens who doesn't know anything and comes here to be slaughtered. If I don't take this opportunity to slaughter you, how can I live up to the painstaking arrangements made by Lan Meisien and the Lan clan? As for threatening me, I don't even care about the elder master of the Lan clan, much less a little bastard like you. And a blind and deaf idiot at that. The sky was already dark. Lanterns were lit everywhere in Iron Cloud Citadel, and people were coming and going. The flow of people was endless. There were very few disturbances. It was obvious that under Tai Butian's rule, Iron Cloud Citadel was very peaceful. The people were kind and simple. Everyone went about their own business and didn't interfere with each other. The entire Tianyun restaurant was booked. Other customers were not allowed to enter. Everyone was guessing which bigwig was going to give a treat. He actually booked the best restaurant in Iron Cloud Citadel. What kind of earth-shattering figure was he going to invite? Lan Ruo, dressed in a blue robe, stood in front of the restaurant to welcome the guests. His expression was calm and natural. One look and you could tell that he was free and easy. He was like a dragon or a phoenix. Along the way, the young ladies who passed by kept stealing glances at each other. What a handsome young man. It's really a pity that he's not a prostitute. Behind him, 2 first-grade supreme martial artists stood quietly. For the Lan clan to put up such a lineup to welcome the guests was already an exception. It should be known that even if the sons of other Grand Dukes came to the Lan clan, Lan Ro would only send someone to lead them in. Lan Ro would only personally come out to welcome those who were really close to him. The night was getting darker, but Chu Yang still hadn't arrived. Lan Ro's expression didn't change, but he was already dissatisfied. Damn it, this bastard is so arrogant. After waiting for a while, there were already drunkards staggering out of the other restaurants nearby, but Minister Chu was still nowhere to be seen. No matter how well-mannered Lan Ro was, he couldn't keep his cool anymore. "Are you sure? He said he's coming?" he asked in a low voice. "That's right. It's just that I don't know why he's not here yet." Behind him, that supreme martial artist expert replied without batting an eyelid. "What an arrogant person!" Lan Ro's lips moved slightly as he cursed under his breath. "When have I ever waited for others like this?" Right at this moment, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from afar. A man on a horse came from afar like a gust of wind. Even on this busy street, he didn't slow down at all and rushed over like a whirlwind. Lan Ro raised his head and saw a tall and big horse. It was snow-white all over, without a single blemish. The golden saddle and golden footrest shone brightly under the light of the lanterns. On the horse's back, a young man in black was riding. His eyebrows were like swords, his eyes were like bright stars, his nose was straight, and his eyes were bright and spirited. He rode steadily on the horse with his back straight like a mountain, his expression cold and arrogant. Just like that, he pursed his lips and galloped all the way. The golden saddle shone on the white horse, moving as valiantly as a shooting star. In the blink of an eye, the white horse reached the Tianyun building. The rider on the horse pulled on the reins. With a long neigh, the sturdy horse reared up and actually stopped just like that. Right in front of Lan Ro. Not more than 5 feet. The moment the sturdy horse reared up, the horse's hind legs almost poked Lan Ro's face. A strange smell assailed his nostrils. The dust that was stirred up landed on Lan Ro with a whoosh. Lan Ro was furious. But before he could fly into a rage, the rider on the horse had already dismounted. His movements were extremely nimble as he laughed heartily and walked toward Lan Ro. "Wahahaha! Is this Duke Lan? Forgive me, ha! I'm extremely sorry for being late, ha! Forgive me. Lan Ro frowned and forced a smile. "You must be Duke Lan. Wahahaha! That's me. He laughed heartily and said, "How embarrassing, haha. As the saying goes, people have 3 urges, haha. Before I came here, in order to feast on Brother Lan, I used a small amount of laxatives. I originally wanted to just empty my stomach, but I didn't expect the dosage to be a little too large. After several trips of defecation, I actually couldn't stop it. It's all watery. How embarrassing, haha. Brother Lan, is the meal ready?" Lan Ro's expression was very interesting. Looking at this glib-tongued tribulation sword master in front of him, he had mixed feelings for a moment. His Adam's apple moved up and down along with his throat. He almost wanted to vomit. "I invited you here for a meal, but before we started eating, you actually explained to me about laxatives and defecation? Who the fuck would be able to eat this?" He even felt like throwing up. Not late. Her. As long as you can come, I don't mind waiting for 3 days and 3 nights. Lan Ro smiled lightly and said. He had originally wanted to say this enthusiastically, but when the words were at the tip of his tongue, that enthusiastically emotion couldn't be aroused no matter what. Besides, if he opened his mouth too wide, he had the urge to vomit immediately. Thus, he could only say it so indifferently. Chuyan laughed loudly. Brother Lan is too polite. If I had known that Brother Lan would actually stand here for so long just to wait for me, I would have held it in no matter what. It's all my fault, all my fault. Talking about defecation before eating, isn't this insulting? Haha, luckily, Brother Lan is magnanimous and doesn't mind. As he spoke, he grabbed Lan Ruo's hand and shook it enthusiastically. At the same time, Chu Yang's gaze was a little strange and heavy. He glanced at Lan Ruo's neck and then returned to normal. Lan Ruo's expression was a little stiff. Looking at Chu Yang's hand, he thought of how this pair of hands had just wiped his butt countless times. Why was he suddenly grabbing his hand now? For a moment, a certain smell seemed to assail his nostrils. Lan Ruo's expression was a little forced as he forcefully retracted his hand. Since Brother Chu is here, please take a seat upstairs. He felt extremely depressed. How am I supposed to eat this meal? It's already good enough that I don't throw up. Chu Yang held Lan Ruo's hand tightly and said emotionally, Brother Lan, you're so righteous. Brother Lan, the moment I saw you, I felt like we were old friends. It seems like I've already known you many years ago. Today, you and I must drink to our heart's content and not return until we're drunk. Come, let's walk arm in arm. He actually pulled Lan Ruo along and walked up. Lan Ruo took a deep breath and suppressed the restlessness in his stomach. Smiling, he said, Since that's the case, Brother Chu, please. Yes. We're all on the same side, don't stand on ceremony. And these two, are your attendants? Go, feed my horse first. This horse is a good one, you can't neglect it. Why? You don't believe me? Look at this horse's mane, it's just like Duke Lan's hair, shiny and shiny. Chapter 1205. The two first-grade supreme martial artists were instantly depressed. Since when did we become followers? And followers with such low status at that? Lan Ruo's face darkened. The horse's mane is the same as my hair? Then what am I? Chu Yang, on the other hand, laughed and held Lan Ruo's hand affectionately. The two of them walked up hand in hand. Seeing the two of them walking over hand in hand, the two supreme martial artists of the Lan clan smiled bitterly. After instructing the waiter of the restaurant to take care of this good horse, they shook their heads and followed. Lan Ruoxin understood it like a mirror. This person was Chu Yang, the king of Hell Chu whom the Iron Cloud nation claimed to be dead. Now that he had reappeared here and was even staying overnight in the palace, it was obvious that this king of Hell Chu was Tai Butian's lover. And according to Lan Meixian, that heavy pill was most likely given to Tai Butian by her lover. Then, King of Hell Chu was most likely the Tribulation Sword Master. Not only Lan Ruo, but even the two supreme martial artists behind him were also very clear-headed. Although this King of Hell Chu appeared to be courteous and cordial on the surface, as if he was about to reunite with his family after a long separation, in fact, he was extremely dissatisfied with the Lan clan's invitation this time. Otherwise, no matter how dissatisfied he was, he wouldn't have said such unbearable things in front of the people who were treating him before the meal. This was obviously a deliberate act of disgust. And it was disgust in all aspects. Moreover, his demeanor revealed a sense of fearlessness. This meant that he had already understood the purpose of the Lan clan waiting here. This was equivalent to indirectly admitting his identity as the Tribulation Sword Master. This gave them unlimited hope. Even if Lan Ruo was on the verge of exploding with anger, he definitely wouldn't dare to say anything that would offend him. Lan Ruoxin was indeed aggrieved, and quite aggrieved. The entire clan had spent so much effort and time to set up such a plan. No matter from which aspect, she had taken the initiative. But when this King of Hell Chu came, and he used such a disgusting method. He didn't say a single word, but everything was clearly telling him, "You are here, I know. Why are you looking for me? I know. I know your ultimate purpose too. So, I have the final say. You are begging me. Not threatening me. You'd better understand this point." He used such a disgusting hooligan method to completely take the initiative. Moreover, Lan Ruo was willing to swallow this grievance without being able to do anything about it. When they finally arrived at the room, the two old men inside stood up with a smile to welcome them. Only then did Chu Jiang let go of Lan Ruo's hand. Only then did Lan Ruo introduce him with a face full of smiles. Brother Chu, this is the 10th generation elder of our Lan clan. Orchid Heart Painting. He paused and said meaningfully, Old Ancestor Heart Painting is currently middle stage Supreme Martial Artist Cultivation. This was vaguely oppressing. Moreover, he had the intention of testing Chu Yang. It was because Lan Rua had discovered something. He couldn't see through Chu Yang's cultivation. If one were to say that Chu Yang's cultivation was higher than his, Lan Rua wouldn't believe it no matter what. Therefore, if Chu Yang's cultivation was too low, it would be revealed immediately after these words were spoken. There wasn't a single person in Jianghu who wasn't sensitive to the word supreme. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. He held Lan Rua's hand enthusiastically and shook it repeatedly. Elder Lan, I've heard so much about you. It's my honor to meet you today. This was the most common greeting and also the most insincere greeting in Jianghu. Now Chu Yang said it smoothly without any pause. It was obvious that there wasn't even the slightest bit of sincerity in it. The smile on Lan Rua's old face was especially bright. Minister Chu, you don't have to be so polite. It's only after meeting Minister Chu today that I know that we are already old. The Jianghu is now the world of the young. Lan Rua smiled and continued to introduce the second person. There were 5 people from the Lan clan in the room. They were all famous experts. Towards Chu Yang's impoliteness, they didn't show the slightest bit of anger. This is the 25th generation elder of the Lan clan, Lan Chifeng. Elder Chenfeng is now a 3rd-grade supreme martial artist. Lan Rua smiled amiably. His posture was as impeccable as a textbook aristocrat. Elder Lan, I've heard so much about you. It's my honor to meet you today. Chu Yang's voice was sincere and clear. This was what he said when he met that person. Now that he met this person, he actually repeated it again. The charm of this was too profound. Lan Qingfeng's face couldn't help but twitch. He smiled and said, Minister Chu is young and promising. Tall and handsome. It's you who makes me hear so much about you. Chu Yang laughed. You flatter me. You flatter me. Unexpectedly, he accepted the compliment without any trace of politeness. Lan Rua only felt a breath stuck in his throat. At this moment, he suddenly regretted it a little. He really shouldn't have forced himself to invite Chu Yang here. He should have used a gentler method. This fellow was obviously taking revenge. But there was no use in regretting it now. He didn't expect this fellow to be so mischievous. He didn't even care about 2nd-grade supreme martial artists who could turn the world upside down. These 2 are the 43rd generation elders of the Lan clan, Lan Moyun and Lan Mozui. Both of them are 1st-grade supreme martial artists. Lan Rua's introduction was already a little weak. The 2 elders Lan. Chu Yang opened his eyes wide enthusiastically. Then, his tone changed. I've heard so much about you. It's my honor to meet you today. The faces of the 5 Lan clan members twitched at the same time. He really wanted to grab this guy's neck and ask him, do you know anything else other than this? After the introduction, Chu Yang still hadn't sat down. As if he was still waiting. Everyone felt a little strange. Then they heard King of Hell Chu say, this, that. Brother Lan, aren't you going to introduce yourself? You don't know me? Lan Rua suddenly felt dizzy. You used the hand that you just used to wipe your ass to hold my hand and walked for so long. You still don't know who I am? This wasn't Chu Yang's fault. Chu Yang really didn't know who this person whose hand he held for such a long distance was. He only knew that his surname was Lan and that he was a duke of the Lan clan. However, he didn't know that he was one of the many dukes of the Lan clan. However, it was undeniable. A big clan. Chu Yang only disliked the dukes of the Lan clan the most. One was Lan Chang'e, the other was Lan Ruoyun. This had already made Chu Yang completely sick of the so-called dukes of the Lan clan. Chu Yang said apologetically, Brother Lan, please introduce me. I'm ignorant. I only know that Brother Lan is an impressive person, but I don't know how impressive you are. I'm Lan Rua. Lan Rua smiled amiably. He couldn't wait to swallow this guy whole. I'm the current, first successor of the Lan clan. Oh. So you're a big young master? Chu Yang laughed. He purposely used the word big a few times. This made Lan Ruoxing feel as if he had eaten a fly. Minister Chu, please take a seat. Lan Xinhua smiled amiably and offered his seat. Chu Yang didn't stand on ceremony at all. Although he said that he didn't dare to accept it, he didn't dare to. Instead, he sat down on the highest seat without standing on ceremony. Everyone, please take a seat. Don't stand on ceremony with me. Chu Yang smiled and offered his seat to the others. Everyone was speechless. Who's treating? Who's treating? Why are you so generous? I'm really sorry. Brother Lan is treating. I should have come earlier, but at the last minute. Minister Chu had the spirit of not giving up until he discussed people to death. He recounted his experience with diarrhea again. The 5 Lan clan experts were dizzy from listening. They hadn't eaten yet, but they were already full. Minister Chu! Lan Ruo stood up with a serious expression. He actually bowed. He said, Little brother knows that our previous invitation has made Minister Chu uncomfortable. I'm here to express my deepest apologies to Minister Chu. I hope that Minister Chu can understand. Minister is deep in the palace and we really don't have a chance. If we force our way in or sneak in, the misunderstanding will be even bigger. Please be magnanimous and forgive us. Lan Ruo was an extremely intelligent person. Chu Yang's performance was very forceful. He gained the upper hand by a show of strength right from the start. He didn't hesitate to belittle himself just to vent his anger. He basically expressed Chu Yang's attitude. I'd rather die in glory than live in dishonor. It was very clear and obvious. At this moment, if he didn't lower his head, there was no way to continue the conversation. He could imagine that when the dishes were served later, Chu Yang would still talk about his experience with diarrhea and there wouldn't be any progress in the conversation. Not to mention any cooperation. Admit defeat? What I want is for you to admit defeat. If you don't admit defeat, I don't know what to do next. Chu Yang looked at Lan Ruo with some surprise on his face. He slowly smiled and said, Since Brother Lan has said so, then I won't say any more. Actually, he was moved. It seemed that the Lan clan didn't have any ability to transmit any information when the heavenly passageway was sealed. In that case, other clans couldn't do it either. Therefore, they probably didn't know that hundreds of Lan clan experts were wiped out in Tianji City. In other words, now, no matter from which aspect, he was the only one who knew the inside story. He had the complete initiative. In that case, weren't these people waiting to be slaughtered by him? The smile on King of Hell Chu's face instantly became warm and friendly. Since he had spoken, the atmosphere instantly became harmonious. Everyone chatted and laughed, talking about interesting things in the martial world. From time to time, they would laugh knowingly. Not long after, the dishes were served. The Lan clan eagerly urged Chu Yang to drink. Chu Yang didn't reject anyone. There were only 5 dishes, but the atmosphere was already in full swing. Everyone looked as if they regretted not having met earlier. The Lan clan realized that as long as Chu Yang didn't mean to discuss people, he was actually a very interesting guy. Of course, as they talked, the topic gradually changed. One doesn't visit a temple without a cause. Minister Chu must know why we're here. Lan Ruo smiled warmly and filled Chu Yang's cup with wine. Chapter 1206. Chu Yang's words seemed to be a joke, but at the same time, it didn't seem to be. But these few people from the Lan clan were obviously very well-mannered. Upon hearing this, they all burst out laughing, as if Chu Yang had said an extremely interesting joke. But everyone's heart skipped a beat. They knew that from the moment Chu Yang sat down until now, the initiative of the Lan clan had rapidly slipped into Chu Yang's hands. And he was getting more and more comfortable with it. Now that things had come to this, it would probably be difficult for them to reverse the passive situation they were in today. This time, the Lan clan had no choice but to do this. Lan Rua said sincerely. Brother Chu, please be understanding. Chu Yang knew that he was talking about the Lan clan arranging for people to wait for more than a year in advance. He waved his hand and said, Let's not talk about this anymore. I still have to thank all of you for protecting Iron Cloud. Lan Rua chuckled. His eyes flickered slightly. He gulped down a few more cups of wine. Under the influence of alcohol, he said either intentionally or unintentionally, I really didn't expect that King of Hell Chu, who single-handedly overturned the universe back then, is actually the Tribulation Sword Master whose name shook the world and dominated the destiny of the heavens. This is really a shocking event. Chu Yang smiled lightly and didn't say anything. But he knew that the highlight of the day was finally here. Seeing that Chu Yang didn't deny it, the few people from the Lan clan's eyes lit up and they exchanged glances. Looks like it should be him. Lan Xinhua smiled and said, Ruor is still a little young. Actually, you should have thought about it long ago. Other than the Tribulation Sword Master, who else in this world can achieve such a shocking reversal of the situation of two big countries when he's powerless? Elder Master is right. Lan Ruo laughed. Chu Yang smiled bitterly and went into a daze. Looking at his expression, it seemed that he wanted to say something but held back. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. He picked up his wine cup and took a sip. His gaze was deep in thought. Faintly. There was also some confusion on his face. Lan Ruo, Lan Xinhua and the others were all stunned. They vaguely felt that something was wrong with Chu Yang. Sure enough, the next moment, Chu Yang sighed bitterly. Lan Ruo's eyes flashed, and he laughed. Brother Chu, one must enjoy life to the fullest. Why are you sighing? Chu Yang smiled and said with some self-mockery. Tribulation Sword Master? Ha. What a great reputation. Sigh. Lan Ruo, Lan Xinhua, and the others exchanged glances, their hearts thumping wildly. Chu Yang stretched out his right hand, and a clang sound was heard. A sword. It appeared in his hand just like that. The sword light was awe-inspiring and brilliant, just like the Sword Emperor. Sovereign's Descent. Calamity Sword. The five of them cried out in their hearts. Their eyes were burning as they looked at the sword. Their gazes were filled with fervor and reverence. Chu Yang's identity as the Sword Master. He could finally confirm it. This year's worth of preparations had finally not been in vain. At this moment, all five of them had the same thought. No one noticed that the moment the Calamity Sword appeared, a colorless and odorless mist melted into the dishes on the table. The fog had completely dissipated. Chu Yang let out a long sigh. With a flip of his hand, he put away the Sword of Calamity, looking desolate. He said, It's true that this thing is a treasure. Since none of you are outsiders, and you know who I am, I won't hide anything from you. Ha. However, what you don't know is the identity of the Master of Calamity Sword. It's really the biggest trap in all of history. The biggest trap in all of history? Lan Ruo and the others were stunned. That's right. Chu Yang drank a cup of wine and said bleakly, It's true that the Calamity Sword can rule the world. However, without power, even with the Calamity Sword, what is it? What use is it? I only found out after I got the Calamity Sword. There is also a backlash. Backlash? Lan Ruo and the others were shocked. There was a backlash from the Calamity Sword. This was the first time they had heard of it. It was indeed mysterious. That's right. The Calamity Sword has a mission. Once it recognizes its master, it starts immediately. If it can't complete it, its soul will dissipate, and it will never be able to reincarnate. Chu Yang's expression was solemn. It's like a whip, lashing the Sword Master forward. However, to complete the mission, one has to unify the heavens. And to unify the heavens, one has to face the big clans. Ha. That's practically impossible. Lan Ruo comforted him sincerely. There will always be a way. It's difficult. Chu Yang let out a bitter laugh. The five of them felt as if their hearts were on fire. Difficult? It's precisely because you think it's difficult that we can do things easily. There's nothing difficult in this world. As long as you put your heart into it, there's nothing you can't do. Lan Re comforted him. Brother Chu, there's no need to be anxious. You will succeed. How difficult? Chu Yang only shook his head. Brother Chu, this. Lan Re felt that the time was about right. He decided to go straight to the point. Brother Chu, we can work together. He looked at Chu Yang's face. And Brother Chu should also be able to guess that the reason why we have been planning for so long in the lower three heavens is to work together with Brother Chu. This is the only reason. Chu Yang sighed. Of course I know. It's just that this matter is extremely dangerous. Even if the Lan clan helps me, the final outcome is very likely to implicate your entire clan. Brother Lan, you have to be careful about this matter. Lan Re smiled confidently and said, Brother Chu, you don't have to worry about this. How can one who wants to achieve great things not have any sacrifices? He paused for a moment and asked somewhat anxiously, But how many brothers does the Lord Sword Master already have? Chu Yang revealed a warm smile and said, At the moment, there are already 7. There were still 2 places left. Lan Re was elated. At the same time, he was also scared. So fast. Ever since the appearance of the heavenly phenomenon Tribulation Sword Master, it had only been 2 years and there were already 7 tribulations. If he was slower by a step, then he wouldn't even be able to catch up to the heat. The eyes of Lan Xinhua and the others also lit up at the same time. There was really hope for the Lan clan. Lan Re wanted to suppress the excitement in his heart, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. He raised his cup and said, If Brother Chu doesn't mind, I am willing to follow you and accompany you to create great things together. Chu Yang pondered and didn't speak for a long time. Everyone didn't rush him and just waited quietly. However, everyone held their breaths. Chu Yang's reaction was very normal. Everyone was very assured. On the contrary, if Chu Yang agreed without hesitation, everyone would be worried. Tribulation. How could it be decided so easily? After a long while, Chu Yang smiled awkwardly and said, Brother Lan has really given me a difficult problem. The few brothers in the past all got to know each other unintentionally and then went through trials and tribulations together for a long time before they acknowledged each other. Brother Lan is really the first to directly bring it up like this. Chu Yang shook his head and smiled bitterly. Lan Re also smiled bitterly and said, I don't have a choice either. Brother Chu should understand my difficulties. Chu Yang nodded. Of course I understand. But this matter, can you let me think about it for a while? Anyway, we can't go up now. Let's just play around in the lower 3 heavens and make a decision after a period of time. How about that? Lan Re was overjoyed. That would be the best. He knew that since Chu Yang had said so, he basically wouldn't reject him. The following period of time would just be a test for him, and it would depend on his performance. Lan Xinhua and the others were also relieved at once. Speaking of social performance, how could Lan Re, as the number 1 duke of the Lan clan, be bad? After such a long time, if he still couldn't get Chu Yang's approval after deliberately trying to befriend him, then Lan Re should really buy a piece of tofu and kill himself. The atmosphere that followed was really lively. Everyone shook their cups and ate, and drank to their heart's content. Their choice of words also seemed a lot more intimate. Lan Re's performance was definitely praiseworthy. He didn't appear to be very eager or fawning. Instead, he was very sincere. Compared to earlier, there was obviously more closeness. However, he gave others a kind of feeling, I am me, I am one of a kind. This kind of feeling was the most pleasing to the eye. Lan Re naturally had his own plans. Looking at the current situation, I naturally have the confidence to become one of the tribulations. However, there are also big and small tribulations. How should I raise my status and strive to become one of the top 3? Or rather, become the leader of the tribulations, that way, in the future, I will be in existence like the Yi clan in the upper 3 heavens. As for the other clans, my Lan clan is such a powerful force. When we unify the upper 3 heavens, our foundation will also be 100 times stronger than those newly established clans. By then, where will there be any big clans? I'll just swallow up all those clans directly. During the meal, Chu Yang's gaze intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Lan Ru's neck a few times before he looked away. Everyone only thought that he was sizing up Lan Ru and instead looked forward to it. This was even more so for Lan Ru himself. Every time Chu Yang's gaze swept over him, he would always act as if nothing had happened and talk cheerfully. He appeared to be brilliant, knowledgeable, elegant, and charming. In the depths of Chu Yang's eyes, a hint of invisible heartache flashed past. He smiled and said, "Big clans are very powerful indeed." One could understand the meaning of a song. The moment he said this, Lan Ru instantly realized that the real test had come. Chu Yang was clearly probing him to see how much he understood about the big clans. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you be victorious in every battle. Big Brother is right. Lan Ru changed his words very naturally. He smiled and said, "Big clans, every clan has 10,000 years of foundation. They are really not to be trifled with." Chu Yang listened with great interest. Oh? To Chu Yang, this was the first time that a core member of a big clan had introduced the clan's strength in detail without any reservations. Chu Yang listened especially attentively. Lan Ru perked up. He said, "Let's take our Lan clan as an example." As he spoke, he started to introduce his clan eloquently, including the number of supreme martial artists, their cultivation levels, how much wealth, how much manpower, how many people could be of great use, how many people were both intelligent and brave, who was the most important person, and so on and so forth. He revealed everything, big and small. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.